Welcome, weary soul, to the fading lands of Lordran, where fire grows dim and shadows lengthen into eternity. Tonight, we shall walk among the lost and the damned, sharing in the stories of those who wander these cursed realms. Here dwell knights without purpose, clerics without faith, and merchants who trade in memories of brighter days. Each carries a tale worth telling, a burden worth understanding. So settle in, let the darkness embrace you, and allow these voices from a dying world to guide you toward peaceful rest. There is no judgment here, only understanding and the gentle comfort of shared sorrow. In the twilight realm of Lordran, where hope flickers like candlelight in an endless storm, there exist souls who have chosen not the path of the warrior or the way of the Lord, but something far more human and infinitely more tragic. These are the merchants and the wanderers, the lost and the abandoned, those who cling to the remnants of civilization, even as the world crumbles around them, like ancient parchment touched by flame. They are the voices of a dying age, speaking truths that heroes often overlook in their grand quests for glory and transcendence. In their words lie the real weight of the undead curse, not as some abstract magical ailment, but as a personal hell that strips away everything that makes existence meaningful, leaving behind only the hollow echo of what once was. At the very heart of this tragedy stands a figure who has become synonymous with despair itself, though he was not always so. The crestfallen warrior sits upon the cold stone steps of Firelink Shrine, his armor dulled by countless days of motionless waiting, his voice carrying the weight of a man who has seen too much and understood even more. He greets each new arrival with the same bitter wisdom, the same warnings that fall upon deaf ears, the same resigned acceptance of futility that marks him as one of the curse's truest victims. Once, perhaps, he had been like those who stumble into Firelink with fire in their eyes and purpose in their hearts. He speaks of bells that must be rung, of chosen undead who will link the fire, but his words carry no conviction, only the mechanical repetition of someone who has watched this cycle play out so many times that it has become meaningless. He is the Greek chorus of Lordran, commenting upon the tragic drama while being powerless to change its outcome. The warrior's descent is not sudden but gradual, like the fading of autumn into winter. Each conversation reveals a little more of his growing despair. Each encounter shows him slipping further into the abyss of purposelessness that awaits all undead who lose their driving obsession. He speaks of the futility of the chosen undead's quest, not out of malice but out of hard-earned wisdom, having seen countless heroes venture forth only to return as hollow shells of their former selves, if they return at all. His warnings about the two bells, about Sen's fortress, about the trials that await, are not meant to discourage but to prepare. Yet few listen, and fewer still understand that his pessimism is born not of cowardice, but of a kind of terrible clarity. He has looked into the heart of Lordran's curse and seen it for what it truly is: not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be endured, not a temporary affliction, but the new natural order of a world that the gods have abandoned. The tragedy of the crestfallen warrior reaches its inevitable conclusion when purpose finally abandons him entirely. The player who returns to Firelink Shrine after ringing the bells will find only empty stone where once sat a soul clinging desperately to the last threads of meaning. His journey ends in the flooded ruins of New Londo, where his hollow form wanders among the ghosts of the dead, having become in death what he feared most in life: just another mindless undead, stripped of everything that had made him worth talking to. Yet even in his final form, there remains something poignant about his fate. The crestfallen warrior's hollowing is not random but purposeful, a kind of literary justice that places him among the drowned dead of a city that was sacrificed to contain a greater evil. In becoming hollow, he joins the ranks of those who were deemed expendable, his individual tragedy absorbed into the greater catastrophe that defines Lordran's history. Far beneath the world's surface, in places where even the bravest heroes fear to tread, other merchants ply their trade among the ruins of civilization. The male undead merchant makes his home in the aqueduct that connects the depths to the undead berg, a liminal space that seems to exist between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. His laughter echoes through the tunnels, with a quality that suggests madness barely held in check. Yet his words reveal a mind that has found its own twisted way of coping with the impossible reality of undead existence. This merchant's philosophy is one of bitter acceptance mixed with dark humor. He sells his wares to anyone with the souls to pay, making no distinction between hero and hollow, understanding that in the end, all undead are equal in their curse. His inventory tells its own story: weapons scavenged from the dead, armor stripped from the fallen, consumables that promise temporary relief from an eternal condition. He is the economy of desperation, trading in the remnants of hope. His observations about the nature of the curse reveal a mind that has spent long years contemplating the metaphysical implications of undead existence. He speaks of humanity not as something lost, but as something that must be constantly maintained, like a fire that requires constant feeding. His understanding of the curse is practical rather than mystical, born from lived experience rather than scholarly study. He knows that the difference between an undead merchant and a hollow monster is nothing more than having something to care about, some small purpose that keeps the mind from fragmenting into madness. The merchant's presence in the aqueduct is itself significant, as he has chosen to make his home in a place that serves as a conduit, a passage between different states of being. Water flows through these tunnels, carrying with it the detritus of the world above, and perhaps there is something fitting about a character who trades in the remnants of civilization, making his home in a place where the waste of that civilization flows past in an endless stream. Even deeper in the bowels of Lordran, in the depths where humanity's refuse has literally and figuratively accumulated, dwells the female undead merchant, whose story is one of the most heartbreaking in all of the Dark Realm. She speaks with the voice of someone who has retained enough of her humanity to feel the full weight of her situation, yet lacks the power to change it in any meaningful way. Her relationship with her friend Yulia reveals the desperate nature of human connection in a world where such connections are constantly threatened by the curse. Yulia has gone hollow, becoming just another mindless undead in a realm full of them. Yet the merchant cannot bring herself to abandon her friend entirely. She continues to speak of Yulia as if she were still alive, still possessed of the personality and memories that had once defined her. This denial is not mere delusion, but a form of resistance against the curse's ultimate victory. By refusing to acknowledge Yulia's complete transformation, by continuing to treat her as a friend rather than a monster, the merchant maintains a connection to her own humanity that might otherwise be lost. It is a small rebellion against the natural order of Lordran, where the living are expected to put the hollow out of their misery rather than cling to the memory of what they once were. The merchant's trade in the depths takes on an almost ritualistic quality, as if the act of commerce itself were a form of prayer or meditation that keeps her mind focused and her humanity intact. Each transaction is a small affirmation of civilization, a tiny victory against the chaos that threatens to consume everything. She offers her wares with a politeness that seems almost absurd in such surroundings, maintaining the social conventions of a world that no longer exists. Her knowledge of the depths and its inhabitants marks her as one of the few undead who has not only survived in this terrible place, but found a way to thrive. She understands the ecology of the cursed realm, knows which areas are safe and which are deadly, has mapped the territories of the various monsters and learned to avoid their attention. In her own small way, she has mastered her environment, carving out a tiny space of relative safety in a world designed to destroy anything resembling hope. From the exotic lands beyond Lordran comes Domnall of Xena, a merchant whose very appearance marks him as foreign to this cursed realm. His distinctive headgear and equipment speak of distant shores and different customs, yet he has chosen to make his living among the undead, selling armor to those who still retain enough humanity to care about their appearance and protection. Domnall's detachment from Lordran's curse gives him a unique perspective on the tragedy unfolding around him. He is not undead himself, at least not in the same way as the others, and this outsider status allows him to observe the curse's effects with something approaching objectivity. His comments about the various pieces of armor he sells often include references to their previous owners, treating each piece of equipment as a memorial to someone who once lived and dreamed and struggled against impossible odds. The armor he trades tells stories without words. Each piece has been worn by someone who believed it would protect them, someone who had hope enough to invest in their own survival. The fact that these items are now for sale speaks to the ultimate futility of such hopes. Yet Domnall treats each piece with a kind of professional respect that elevates his trade above mere scavenging. His presence in Lordran raises questions about the wider world beyond the cursed realm. If merchants like Domnall can travel freely between lands, what does that suggest about the nature of the curse? Is it truly contained within Lordran's borders, or is it simply more concentrated there? His casual attitude toward the supernatural horrors around him suggests that such things may be more common in the wider world than the local inhabitants realize. The merchant's knowledge of armor and weapons extends beyond their mere practical applications into their histories and the stories of those who wielded them. He can identify the origin of a piece of equipment by its craftsmanship, recognize the style of different smiths and different eras. In this way, he serves as an informal historian of the realm, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost as its original bearers succumb to the curse. Perhaps the most mysterious of all the realm's traders is Marvelous Chester, whose very existence seems to violate the natural order of time and space. His appearance is anachronistic, his clothing and equipment belonging to an era that has not yet come to pass, his mannerisms and speech patterns marking him as a visitor, not just from another place but from another time entirely. Chester's displacement from his proper temporal location has given him a perspective on Lordran's curse that is both unique and deeply unsettling. He has seen the ultimate consequences of the choices being made in the present, has witnessed the final outcome of the struggle between light and dark that defines the age. His sardonic humor and casual references to future events create an atmosphere of predestination that robs even the most heroic actions of their meaning. The gunpowder weapons that Chester carries are impossibly advanced for Lordran's medieval fantasy setting, their very existence suggesting that the world will eventually progress beyond its current state of magical feudalism into something resembling the Renaissance or even later periods. Yet Chester's presence also suggests that this technological advancement may not bring the salvation that such progress usually promises in stories of historical development. His knowledge of the abyss and its effects reveals that humanity's dark impulses will continue to manifest even in more technologically advanced eras. The corruption that has consumed Ulasil and threatens to spread throughout Lordran is not a temporary setback but a permanent feature of human existence, something that will continue to emerge in new forms, regardless of how sophisticated civilization becomes. Chester's casual cruelty and apparent enjoyment of others' suffering marks him as someone who has been fundamentally changed by his exposure to the abyss and his displacement in time. He has seen too much of humanity's capacity for evil, has witnessed the ultimate futility of trying to build something lasting and good in a world where darkness constantly threatens to consume everything. His marvelous nature is revealed to be a kind of terrible wonder at the depths of depravity that intelligent beings can reach when their moral constraints are removed. In a realm where most inhabitants are either hollow or fighting desperately to avoid that fate, these merchants and wanderers represent a different kind of survival strategy. Rather than seeking glory or transcendence, they have chosen to find meaning in the small transactions and brief connections that commerce provides. They are the support structure that allows heroes to function, the economic foundation upon which quests for enlightenment depend. Yet their stories reveal the true cost of such survival. Each of them has paid a price for their continued existence, whether it is the crestfallen warrior's crushing despair, the male merchant's embrace of bitter humor, the female merchant's denial of reality, Domhnall's emotional detachment, or Chester's moral corruption. They show us that surviving in Lordran requires not just physical endurance, but psychological adaptations that would be considered pathological in any healthier world. Their presence throughout the realm serves as a constant reminder that civilization persists even in the darkest circumstances, but in forms that are almost unrecognizable. The normal functions of society, trade, conversation, the sharing of information continue to operate, but they do so in service of goals and values that would be incomprehensible to those living in more fortunate times and places. As we move deeper into their stories, we begin to understand that these merchants and wanderers are not simply background characters providing services to more important figures. They are the chroniclers of Lordran's decline, the witnesses who remember what the world was like before the curse took hold, the voices that speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. In their transactions and conversations, they preserve the last remnants of a humanity that is rapidly disappearing from the world, keeping alive the memory of what it means to be human in a realm where such knowledge is becoming increasingly rare and precious. In the shadowed halls where honor once walked with measured steps and purpose burned bright as forge fire, there now wander souls who have lost their way not through cowardice or weakness, but through the cruelest twist of fate that can befall a warrior, the gradual erosion of everything they once stood for. These are the knights and champions of Lordran, men and women who took up arms in service of ideals greater than themselves, only to watch those ideals crumble like ancient stone beneath the relentless pressure of time and curse. Their stories are perhaps the most tragic of all the tales that echo through these dying lands, for they speak not merely of personal failure, but of the collapse of entire systems of meaning. When a merchant loses his way, commerce suffers but continues. When a scholar falls to madness, knowledge is endangered but endures. But when knights abandon their oaths and warriors forget their purpose, the very concept of heroism itself begins to die, leaving behind a world where strength serves no master but naked survival, and honor becomes just another word for a luxury that the living can no longer afford. Among these fallen champions, none embodies the corruption of noble purpose quite like Knight Lautrec of Karim, whose golden armor gleams with a light that seems to mock the darkness of his true nature. Here is a man who has taken the sacred oaths of knighthood and twisted them into a philosophy that would be considered heretical in any age where gods still answered prayers and justice still held meaning. Lautrec's devotion to the goddess Fina reveals itself not as the pure worship that marks a true paladin, but as something far more disturbing, a a fanatical obsession that has transformed love into possession and service into dominance. He speaks of his goddess with the fervor of a lover describing his beloved, yet his actions reveal an understanding of divine will that places his own desires above the welfare of everyone around him. In his twisted theology, murder becomes sacrament and betrayal becomes proof of faith. The knight's philosophy extends beyond mere religious deviation into a comprehensive worldview that rejects the fundamental premises upon which civilization depends. He sees compassion as weakness, trust as foolishness, and cooperation as a delusion that blinds people to the harsh realities of existence. In his understanding, the strong have not merely the right but the obligation to prey upon the weak, and those who refuse to embrace this truth are simply revealing their own unfitness for survival. His murder of Anastasia, the mute firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, represents more than mere cruelty or even strategic calculation. It is a theological statement, a declaration that the old order of service and sacrifice has been superseded by a new understanding in which the individual will is the only true divinity. By silencing the keeper of the shrine's flame, Lautrec strikes at the very heart of the system that provides comfort and hope to the undead, replacing it with the cold logic of his own twisted faith. The knight's appearance in Anor Londo, where he makes his final stand alongside his companions Patches and his unnamed ally, reveals the full scope of his transformation from protector to predator. Here, in the city of the gods themselves, he has established himself as a force of active malevolence, using the very skills he once employed to defend the innocent as tools for their exploitation and destruction. His final confrontation with those who would avenge Anastasia takes on the quality of a perverted crusade, with Lautrec fighting not for survival but for the right to impose his nihilistic theology upon a world that still clings to older, gentler truths. His defeat represents not merely the triumph of good over evil, but the rejection of a worldview that would make existence itself meaningless by reducing all relationships to calculations of power and advantage. Yet even in death, Lautrec's influence lingers, for he has demonstrated that the corruption of noble purpose is always possible, that even the most sacred oaths can be twisted to serve the darkest ends. His ring, recovered from his corpse, serves as a permanent reminder that the line between protector and predator is often thinner than those who walk it would like to believe. From the sun-drenched lands of Astora comes another figure whose story illustrates the tragic nobility that can emerge even from the most hopeless circumstances. Solaire of Astora represents the opposite pole from Lautrec's cynicism, a warrior whose faith in the possibility of meaning and purpose burns so brightly that it illuminates the darkness around him, even as it threatens to consume him entirely. Solaire's quest for his own son speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit: the need to find something larger than oneself to serve and worship. In a world where the gods have fallen silent and the natural order has collapsed into chaos, he continues to seek transcendence, to believe that somewhere in the vast tapestry of existence there must be a place where his devotion can find its proper object. The jolly cooperation that defines Solaire's interactions with other undead reveals a character who has chosen to respond to the curse, not with despair or cynicism, but with an almost aggressive optimism that refuses to acknowledge the hopelessness of their situation. He offers his aid freely, asks for nothing in return, and treats every encounter as an opportunity for fellowship and mutual support. His understanding of the undead condition is both profound and ultimately tragic, for he recognizes that purpose is what separates the living from the hollow, yet he has chosen a purpose that may be fundamentally unattainable. His search for his own son is not merely a quest for power or knowledge, but a spiritual journey toward a form of enlightenment that may not exist in the form he imagines. The sunlight maggot that threatens to corrupt Solaire's mind represents one of the cruelest ironies in all of Lordran's tragic landscape. Here is a creature that literally provides the light he has been seeking, yet it does so by consuming his sanity and replacing his genuine faith with a false illumination that burns away everything that made his quest meaningful in the first place. The choice between saving Solaire from this false sun or allowing him to achieve his goal at the cost of his humanity presents one of the most complex moral dilemmas in the realm. Is it more merciful to preserve his sanity at the cost of his dream, or to allow him to find the transcendence he seeks even if it transforms him into something that is no longer recognizably himself? If saved from the maggot's influence, Solaire's presence in the final battle against Gwyn reveals the true nobility of his character. He stands beside the chosen undead not because he seeks glory or reward, but because he understands that some battles must be fought regardless of their ultimate outcome. His faith has evolved beyond the need for external validation into something more subtle and more profound. The simple conviction that doing right is its own reward, even in a world where right and wrong have become almost impossible to distinguish. The warriors of Katarina bring their own unique tragedy to the catalogue of Lordran's fallen knights, embodying a culture that valued honor and duty above personal safety or comfort. Sigmire of Katarina, with his distinctive onion-shaped armor and unfailingly cheerful demeanor, represents the stubborn persistence of courtly values in a world that has moved far beyond the age when such values had any practical application. Sigmire's adventures throughout the realm take on an almost quixotic quality, as he continues to approach each obstacle with the mindset of a knight-errant from some earlier, more innocent age when problems could be solved through courage and determination alone. His inability to recognize the fundamental changes that have transformed the world around him becomes both endearing and heartbreaking as we watch him apply solutions that might have worked in better times to problems that require a very different kind of wisdom. The knight's relationship with his daughter Sieglinde reveals the generational divide that has opened between those who remember the old world and those who have grown up knowing only the cursed reality of the present. Sieglinde loves her father deeply, yet she recognizes with painful clarity that his approach to life is fundamentally unsuited to their current circumstances. Sigmire's gradual descent into hollow purposelessness illustrates one of the curse's cruelest mechanisms. Unlike those who lose their humanity through dramatic trauma or sudden revelation, he simply finds himself with fewer and fewer meaningful challenges to overcome. Each obstacle that others remove on his behalf, each problem solved by someone else's intervention, brings him closer to the ultimate realization that he is no longer needed in a world that has learned to function without the kind of heroism he represents. The knight's final sacrifice in the demon ruins, where he attempts to clear the way for others by throwing himself into a pit filled with chaos demons, represents both the noble culmination of his character and its tragic futility. He dies as he lived, believing that individual courage can make a meaningful difference, yet his death changes nothing significant about the larger situation facing the undead of Lordran. Sieglinde's mercy killing of her hollowed father represents perhaps the most complex act of love in all the realm's tragic history. She understands that allowing him to continue existing as a hollow would be a betrayal of everything he stood for. Yet, ending his life requires her to take upon herself a burden of guilt and sorrow that will define the rest of her existence. Her tears over his grave speak to the impossible choices that the curse forces upon those who retain their humanity. In a healthier world, children should never have to make such decisions about their parents. Yet in Lordran, such choices have become commonplace, another way in which the natural order has been inverted, and the bonds that should provide comfort instead become sources of agony. The invasion mechanics that bring Kirk, Knight of Thorns, into contact with other undead reveal a character whose aggression masks a deeper purpose that is both noble and tragic. Unlike invaders who seek only to prove their superiority or claim rewards, Kirk's attacks serve a higher purpose that transforms his apparent cruelty into a form of twisted charity. Kirk's service to the fair lady of Izalith, the diseased and dying sister of the Chaos Witch Quelag, represents one of the purest forms of devotion found anywhere in Lordran. His invasions are not motivated by bloodlust or desire for personal advancement, but by the desperate need to gather humanity that might ease his mistress's suffering, even if only temporarily. The knight's thorned armor tells its own story of sacrifice and dedication, each spike representing not merely a weapon but a symbol of the pain he is willing to endure in service of another's welfare. He has literally surrounded himself with instruments of suffering, transforming his own body into a tool for gathering the spiritual essence needed to help the one creature in all the world who has earned his complete loyalty. His presence throughout the realm, always appearing at moments when other undead are most vulnerable, creates an atmosphere of constant threat that serves the larger narrative purpose of demonstrating that even the most noble purposes can require actions that appear evil to those who do not understand their context. Kirk's invasions force other characters to defend themselves against someone whose ultimate motivations are actually quite pure, creating moral ambiguity that reflects the broader ethical complexity of existence in a cursed world. The discovery of Kirk's corpse in the Fair Lady's chamber, surrounded by the humanity he died trying to gather, provides a moment of revelation that recontextualizes all of his previous aggression. Here is a warrior who gave everything he had for someone who could never truly appreciate his sacrifice, whose devotion was so complete that it literally consumed him. His final resting place beside the object of his devotion suggests that his sacrifice was not entirely in vain, that even if he could not ultimately save the Fair Lady, he at least succeeded in expressing through his actions a form of love that transcended the normal boundaries between life and death, sanity and madness, heroism and villainy. From the ruined city of Ulasil comes King Jeremiah, whose madness represents not personal failure, but the collapse of an entire civilization's capacity to maintain order and meaning. As the king of the undead outcasts who inhabit the painted world of Ariamis, Jeremiah embodies the fate that awaits all rulers when their kingdoms are consumed by forces beyond their ability to control or understand. Jeremiah's imprisonment within the painted world speaks to the way in which leadership can become a curse in itself when circumstances make effective governance impossible. He has been granted dominion over a realm of exiles and outcasts, beings who have been rejected by the normal world and who cannot be ruled through conventional means. His mad laughter and chaotic attacks reveal a mind that has been broken not by external trauma, but by the impossible demands of trying to maintain sanity in a situation that defies rational response. How does one govern subjects who are themselves products of madness? How does one maintain order in a realm specifically designed as a refuge for those who cannot exist within normal society? The king's mastery of pyromancy reflects the way in which his madness has been channeled into a form of creative destruction that mirrors the larger themes of chaos and order that define Lordran's spiritual landscape. His flames burn not with the controlled purpose of a skilled practitioner, but with the wild energy of someone who has embraced destruction as the only honest response to a world that has moved beyond the possibility of construction. His presence in the painted world serves as a warning about the ultimate fate of leadership in a world where the normal mechanisms of authority have broken down. Even kings become hollow when the kingdoms they rule cease to provide meaning and purpose, and the crown becomes just another burden to be borne by those unlucky enough to wear it. The discovery of his corpse, should he be defeated, provides no great revelation or treasure, only the sad confirmation that even royal madness is ultimately just another form of the same curse that affects everyone in Lordran. Death comes to kings and commoners alike, and the painted world continues to exist regardless of who claims to rule it. These fallen knights and warriors represent more than individual tragedies. They embody the death of an entire worldview that once gave structure and meaning to human existence. In their various forms of corruption, madness, and despair, we see reflected the broader collapse of the systems of value that once made heroism possible and meaningful. Their weapons and armor, scattered throughout the realm and available for others to claim, serve as material reminders of the transitory nature of all earthly glory. The swords they once wielded with pride now serve other hands. The armor that once protected noble hearts now shields different souls, and the principles they died defending have been forgotten by all but the most dedicated historians of a world that no longer values such knowledge. Yet in their various forms of persistence, whether through invasion, cooperation, or simple stubborn refusal to abandon their posts, these fallen champions also demonstrate something indestructible about the human spirit. Even when their causes have been revealed as hopeless and their methods have been proven ineffective, they continue to act as if meaning were still possible, as if heroism still mattered, as if the choices they make could still have consequences that extend beyond their own immediate survival. Their stories remind us that the corruption of noble purpose is always a possibility, that even the most sacred oaths can be twisted to serve darker ends, but they also demonstrate that the capacity for nobility persists even in the most degraded circumstances. In their various forms of failure and transcendence, they preserve something essential about what it means to be human, even in a world where humanity itself has become a commodity to be traded and consumed, rather than a quality to be cherished and protected. In the crumbling libraries and abandoned laboratories of Lordran, where dust motes dance in shafts of dying light and ancient tomes whisper secrets that should have remained buried, dwell the most tragic figures of all those who sought truth and found only madness, who pursued knowledge and discovered that some questions are too dangerous to ask. These are the scholars and seekers, the sorcerers and researchers whose hunger for understanding led them down paths that transformed enlightenment into curse and wisdom into torment. Their stories serve as cautionary tales about the price of forbidden knowledge, yet they also reveal the nobility inherent in the quest for truth, even when that quest leads to destruction. In a world where ignorance might be considered a blessing and curiosity has become a form of spiritual suicide, these learned souls continue to seek answers long after it became clear that the questions themselves were consuming their humanity. The greatest among these tragic figures of learning stands Big Hat Logan, the master sorcerer, whose very name has become synonymous with both the heights of magical achievement and the depths of scholarly obsession. His distinctive hat, larger and more elaborate than any practical purpose could justify, serves as both a symbol of his status and a physical manifestation of the pride that would ultimately prove his undoing. Logan's journey to the Duke's archives represents the culmination of a lifetime spent in pursuit of magical knowledge, yet it also marks the beginning of his transformation from teacher to cautionary tale. The crystalline experiments of Seath the Scaleless call to him with a siren song that no amount of wisdom or experience can help him resist, for they promise answers to questions that have tormented him throughout his long career as a practitioner of the magical arts. The sorcerer's imprisonment in Sen's fortress serves as a temporary reprieve from his obsession, an enforced period of reflection that might have saved him if he had possessed the wisdom to recognize it as such. Yet, even in captivity, his mind remains fixed upon the forbidden knowledge that awaits him in the Duke's domain, and his rescue becomes not liberation, but the removal of the last obstacle between him and his doom. Logan's transformation in the archives unfolds with the terrible inevitability of a classical tragedy, each step toward greater understanding marked by a corresponding loss of humanity and sanity. The crystalline sorceries that he masters represent power beyond anything he had previously imagined, yet they come at a cost that makes their acquisition a form of spiritual suicide rather than genuine advancement. His gradual adoption of Seath's research methods, including the Duke's disregard for the welfare of experimental subjects, reveals how completely the pursuit of knowledge has corrupted his moral compass. The man who once taught magic as a tool for understanding and protecting life has become someone who views living beings as nothing more than raw material for his experiments, their suffering justified by the possibility that it might yield new insights into the nature of crystalline magic. The hollow shell that Logan ultimately becomes, sitting naked among the crystals he once coveted, represents the ultimate futility of trying to transcend human limitations through the acquisition of forbidden knowledge. His great hat lies discarded beside him, no longer a symbol of achievement but a reminder of the pride that led him to trade his humanity for power that he can no longer appreciate or properly use. His final spells, discovered among his research notes, carry within them the essence of his tragedy, magic so powerful that it consumes the life force of its caster, transforming the pursuit of knowledge into a form of elaborate suicide. These crystalline sorceries represent the logical endpoint of his research, magic that embodies the principle that some forms of power can only be obtained by surrendering everything that makes their possession meaningful. Griggs of Vinheim, Logan's devoted student, provides a counterpoint to his master's story that is no less tragic for being more subtle in its development. Where Logan's fall is dramatic and obvious, Griggs's decline unfolds quietly, marked more by what he loses than by what he gains. His search for his master becomes a quest that transforms him from an eager student into a hollow echo of scholarly ambition. The young sorcerer's imprisonment in the lower undead burg serves as a metaphor for the way in which devotion to a teacher can become a form of intellectual bondage. His gratitude for rescue is genuine and touching, yet it masks a dependence that makes independent thought increasingly difficult as his obsession with following Logan's path grows stronger. Griggs's mastery of basic sorceries demonstrates genuine talent and understanding, yet his inability to develop beyond the techniques his master taught him reveals the limitations of an educational philosophy based upon imitation rather than innovation. He becomes a repository of Logan's knowledge without ever developing the creative spark that would allow him to build upon that foundation in meaningful ways. His final fate in the archives, should he succeed in following Logan to that cursed place, represents the tragedy of the devoted student who cannot recognize when loyalty becomes self-destruction. He witnesses his master's transformation into something inhuman, yet continues to revere Logan's achievement, unable or unwilling to see that the power his teacher has gained has come at the cost of everything that made him worth following in the first place. The absence of Griggs from the world, should he avoid the archives entirely, speaks to a different kind of tragedy, the loss of potential that occurs when fear prevents growth. In avoiding his master's fate, he also abandons the possibility of contributing anything significant to the magical arts, becoming a keeper of old knowledge rather than a creator of new understanding. In the flooded ruins of New Londo dwells Ingwood, one of the four sealers whose collective sacrifice saved Lordran from the encroaching darkness of the abyss, yet whose individual story reveals the terrible personal cost of such heroic action. His mastery of the secret arts that were used to contain the four kings represents knowledge that came too late to prevent tragedy and too early to offer hope for redemption. Ingward's solitary vigil among the drowned dead speaks to the way in which knowledge of forbidden arts isolates its possessors from normal human society. He alone among the sealers remains to guard the secret of New Londo's destruction, carrying the burden of knowing exactly what was sacrificed to prevent a greater catastrophe. His presence in the ruins serves as both memorial and warning, a living reminder of the prices that must sometimes be paid to preserve civilization. The sealer's mastery of soul magic and his knowledge of the transient curse reveal a scholar who has delved deeply into the fundamental nature of life and death. Yet this understanding has brought him no peace or satisfaction. He knows how to manipulate the very essence of being, yet this knowledge serves only to emphasize the futility of his situation and the impossibility of undoing what has been done. His willingness to teach the art of transient curse to those who would enter the ruins speaks to a practical wisdom that recognizes the necessity of sharing dangerous knowledge when circumstances require it. Yet his warnings about the nature of the ghosts and the history of New Londo reveals someone who takes no pleasure in passing on such dark secrets, understanding that each student he teaches is someone else who will be burdened with knowledge that brings more sorrow than enlightenment. The key to the seal of New Londo that Ingward guards represents more than mere physical security. It embodies the moral weight of decisions that affect entire populations. His eventual willingness to surrender this key to those who demonstrate sufficient resolve speaks to his recognition that some choices must ultimately be left to others, even when he knows that those choices will likely lead to further tragedy. His knowledge of the Lord Vessel and its significance in the larger struggle against the darkness reveals the scope of his understanding, yet also emphasizes his powerlessness to influence events beyond his immediate sphere of responsibility. He is a scholar whose learning encompasses cosmic forces, yet who finds himself reduced to the role of gatekeeper and guardian of secrets that may no longer have any practical relevance. Deep beneath Anor Londo, in chambers that echo with the sound of hammer striking anvil, works Rickard of Vinheim, a smith whose expertise with magical weapons represents a unique synthesis of scholarly learning and practical craftsmanship. His imprisonment in the City of the Gods speaks to the way in which useful knowledge can become a form of bondage when those in power recognize its value and refuse to allow its possessor the freedom to leave. Rickard's mastery of magical weapon enhancement represents knowledge that bridges the gap between theoretical understanding and practical application. Yet his isolation from the wider community of scholars has prevented him from contributing to the advancement of magical theory. He has become a highly specialized craftsman, rather than a true researcher. His talents channeled into narrow channels that serve the immediate needs of those who control his circumstances. The smith's warnings about the dangers of advanced magic reveal someone who has witnessed firsthand the corrupting effects of power pursued without wisdom or restraint. His position in Anor Londo has given him unique insight into the way that magical knowledge is used by those who wield authority, and his observations carry the weight of experience rather than mere theoretical speculation. His willingness to share his services with any who can provide the necessary materials speaks to a professional ethics that transcends political considerations. Yet his inability to leave his underground workshop reveals the limitations placed upon his freedom by forces beyond his control. He is a scholar whose knowledge serves others rather than advancing his own understanding, a situation that represents both service and tragedy. The magical weapons that emerge from Rickard's forge carry within them the essence of his compromise between intellectual independence and practical necessity. Each enhanced blade or staff represents his ability to channel magical knowledge into forms that can be used by others. Yet they also remind us that his own research has been subordinated to the immediate needs of those who would wield such weapons in combat. His knowledge of different magical schools and their relative merits reveals a breadth of understanding that suggests capabilities far beyond those of a mere craftsman. Yet his circumstances have prevented him from developing these insights into new forms of magical practice. He remains a keeper of old techniques rather than an innovator, his potential unrealized due to external constraints rather than personal limitations. From the ancient forests of Ulasil comes Dusk, a princess whose knowledge of light magic represents the last remnant of a magical tradition that was destroyed by humanity's encounter with the primordial darkness of the abyss. Her rescue from the crystal golem that has served as her prison reveals not liberation, but the emergence of someone who has been displaced from her proper time and context, leaving her as a living museum piece in a world that has moved far beyond the innocent optimism that once characterized her people's approach to magic. Dusk's mastery of sorceries that heal and illuminate stands in stark contrast to the destructive and corruptive magic that has become dominant in the post-abyss world. Yet her techniques carry within them the tragic innocence of a civilization that never learned to account for humanity's capacity for evil. Her light magic represents power that was designed for a world where darkness was merely the absence of illumination rather than an active force of corruption and destruction. The princess's displacement in time has given her a perspective on the consequences of her people's hubris that is both unique and unbearably painful. She has witnessed the transformation of Ulasil from a center of learning and magical innovation into a realm of twisted monstrosities, yet her temporal displacement prevents her from fully understanding how or why this transformation occurred. Her willingness to teach her magic to others represents both generous sharing of knowledge and a desperate attempt to preserve something of her people's legacy. Yet the context in which this teaching occurs emphasizes the futility of trying to restore innocence once it has been lost. Her light sorceries, when used in the corrupted world of Lordran, serve purposes that their original creators never intended, becoming tools of survival rather than instruments of enlightenment. The princess's knowledge of Ulasil's history provides crucial insight into the events that led to the Abyss disaster, yet her perspective is necessarily limited by her status as a victim rather than a perpetrator of the choices that brought about her people's doom. She can describe what happened to her kingdom, but she cannot fully explain why it happened, or how similar tragedies might be prevented in the future. Her eventual fate, whether it involves rescue by those who value her knowledge or abandonment to the forces that originally displaced her, speaks to the broader question of whether wisdom from the past can find meaningful application in a present that has been fundamentally transformed by the consequences of previous mistakes. In the deepest sanctuaries of Ulasil, where ancient magic still flows through channels carved by forgotten hands, dwells Elizabeth, a being whose nature transcends the normal categories of life and death, wisdom and madness. As a mushroom creature of apparently ancient origin, she represents a form of consciousness that predates the arrival of humans in Ulasil, yet her deep knowledge of the events that led to the kingdom's destruction reveals someone who witnessed the disaster from a perspective that was both intimate and detached. Elizabeth's role as guardian of the sanctuary demonstrates a form of protective wisdom that seeks to preserve what can be saved rather than attempting to restore what has been lost. Her knowledge of the healing arts and her ability to enhance the effectiveness of Estus flasks speaks to practical wisdom born from long experience with the needs of those who must survive in dangerous circumstances. The ancient creature's perspective on the Abyss disaster reveals someone who understood the dangers inherent in humanity's magical experiments long before their consequences became apparent to the humans themselves. Her warnings about the corrupting influence of darkness carry the weight of first-hand observation, yet they also reveal the limitations of her influence over events that unfolded according to their own terrible logic. Her relationship with the various figures involved in the Abyss disaster, from Artorias to Manus to the unnamed hero who ultimately contained the spreading corruption, demonstrates a form of nurturing wisdom that seeks to help others fulfill their destinies, even when those destinies involve great personal sacrifice. She provides aid and comfort to those who must face darkness, yet she cannot shield them from the consequences of their choices. Elizabeth's knowledge of the connection between humanity and the Abyss reveals understanding that encompasses both the immediate practical concerns of dealing with corruption and the larger philosophical questions about the nature of human existence. Her insights into the relationship between light and dark, order and chaos, provide a perspective that is both ancient and surprisingly relevant to the contemporary situation in Lordran. Her continued existence in the sanctuary, long after the kingdom it was designed to protect has fallen into ruin, speaks to a form of dedication that transcends personal survival or advancement. She maintains her post, not because she expects to accomplish anything significant, but because the act of maintenance itself has become a form of prayer or meditation that gives meaning to her continued existence. These scholars and seekers of truth, in their various forms of corruption and transcendence, represent the double-edged nature of knowledge itself, in a world where understanding often comes at prices that make its acquisition questionable. Their stories reveal that the pursuit of truth is both the highest form of human endeavor and one of the most dangerous, capable of elevating those who engage in it to heights of wisdom and power, while simultaneously destroying everything that makes such elevation meaningful. Their libraries and laboratories, scattered throughout the realm and filled with the remnants of research that was never completed, serve as monuments to the ambition and futility of trying to understand forces that may be fundamentally incomprehensible to human consciousness. The books they wrote and the experiments they conducted continue to influence those who come after them, yet this influence is as likely to lead to destruction as to genuine advancement. Their various forms of madness and corruption illustrate the ways in which the human mind responds to knowledge that exceeds its capacity to process or integrate, yet their dedication to their studies, even in the face of such consequences, demonstrates something indestructible about the human commitment to understanding. Even when the quest for knowledge destroys the seeker, it preserves something essential about what it means to be human, in a world where such meaning is constantly under attack from forces that would reduce existence to mere survival or mindless repetition. In their failures and achievements, these tragic figures of learning preserve the memory of what intellectual curiosity can accomplish when it is properly directed, while simultaneously warning about the dangers that await those who pursue understanding without wisdom or restraint. They remind us that knowledge is never neutral, that the act of learning changes the learner in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled, and that the price of enlightenment may sometimes be everything that makes enlightenment worth having. In the sacred spaces where flame flickers against eternal darkness and faith struggles to maintain its hold against the encroaching void, dwell those souls who have devoted themselves to powers greater than mortal understanding. These are the servants of dying gods and fading lights, the keepers of flames that grow dimmer with each passing age, the faithful who continue their devotions even as the objects of their worship slip ever further beyond the reach of prayer and supplication. Their stories speak to the complex relationship between faith and despair that defines existence in Lordran, where belief has become both the last refuge of hope and the source of the cruelest delusions. In their various forms of service and sacrifice, these clerics and flamekeepers preserve something essential about the human capacity for transcendence, even as they demonstrate the tragic consequences that can follow when that capacity is directed toward powers that may no longer deserve such devotion. The most poignant figure among these servants of the sacred is Anastasia of Astora, the firekeeper of Firelink Shrine, whose silence speaks more eloquently than any words could convey about the nature of sacrifice and service in a world where both have been stripped of their traditional meanings. Her mutilation, the removal of her tongue that has left her unable to speak, serves as both practical impediment and symbolic representation of the way in which the curse has robbed even the most devoted servants of their ability to bear witness to the truths they preserve. Anastasia's role as keeper of the shrine's bonfire places her at the very center of the undead pilgrimage, the fixed point around which all other journeys revolve. Yet her inability to communicate with those she serves creates a fundamental isolation that transforms her service into a form of beautiful torture. She tends the flame that provides comfort and hope to countless lost souls, yet she cannot share in the conversations and companionship that give such comfort its deepest meaning. Her resurrection after Lautrec's betrayal reveals the true nature of her commitment to her sacred duty. Even death cannot release her from the obligations she has accepted, and her return to life comes not as blessing but as renewed bondage to a purpose that transcends her individual will or desire. The firekeeper soul that animates her existence represents power that belongs not to her but to the flame she serves, making her less a person than a living extension of the sacred fire itself. The armor that protects her fragile form tells its own story of dedication that has moved beyond normal human categories of choice and compulsion. Each piece has been crafted specifically for her role, designed not for mobility or combat effectiveness, but for the specialized needs of someone whose entire existence has been reduced to a single sacred function. She has become, in both literal and metaphorical senses, a vessel for divine purpose that has consumed her individual identity. Her acceptance of her fate, demonstrated through her willingness to resume her duties without complaint or resentment, speaks to a form of spiritual transcendence that is both inspiring and deeply troubling. She has achieved the selflessness that all religious traditions praise, yet she has done so at the cost of everything that makes selflessness a meaningful choice rather than mere programmed response. The cage that surrounds her serves as physical manifestation of the spiritual imprisonment that defines her existence, yet it also provides protection for someone whose value to others has made her a target for those who would exploit or destroy what she represents. Her safety depends upon barriers that simultaneously shield her from harm and prevent her from experiencing the full range of human connection and freedom. From the Way of White comes Rhea of Thoroland, a cleric whose noble birth and genuine piety make her story one of the most heartbreaking in all the realm's catalogue of tragedies. Her pilgrimage to the catacombs and tomb of giants represents the intersection of political ambition and spiritual seeking that characterizes much of organized religion in Lordran, yet her individual commitment to her faith transcends the institutional corruption that surrounds and ultimately destroys her. Rhea's mastery of miracle magic reveals someone who has achieved genuine connection with the divine powers she serves. Yet, her naivety about the political realities of religious life makes her vulnerable to exploitation by those who view her abilities as resources to be controlled rather than gifts to be respected. Her willingness to venture into the most dangerous areas of the realm speaks to courage that is both admirable and tragically misguided. The failure of her companions to protect her during their mission to the catacombs reveals the way in which institutional religion can betray its most devoted servants through inadequate preparation and cynical calculation of acceptable losses. Vince and Nico, the clerics assigned as her bodyguards, prove to be cowards whose primary concern is their own survival rather than the welfare of the woman they were sworn to protect. Her capture by the forces that dwell in the Tomb of Giants represents more than mere physical imprisonment. It symbolizes the fate that awaits those who carry light into places of absolute darkness without adequate understanding of the forces they will encounter there. Her pure faith, which should theoretically provide protection against evil, instead makes her a more valuable prize for those who seek to corrupt or consume such purity. The transformation that Rhea undergoes during her captivity, assuming she survives long enough to be rescued, reveals the way in which exposure to concentrated evil can poison even the most dedicated servants of light. Her hollow shell, should she be found too late, serves as reminder that no amount of faith can shield someone from the fundamental realities of the curse that has consumed the world. Her potential rescue by those who value her knowledge rather than her person speaks to the complex moral calculations that survival in Lordran requires. Even those who would save her may be motivated more by desire for the miracles she can teach than by genuine concern for her welfare, making her continued existence another form of exploitation, even when it is dressed in the garments of heroism. The clerics Vince and Nico embody the institutional cowardice that has infected organized religion in Lordran, their abandonment of Rhea representing the betrayal of everything their faith claims to stand for. Their retreat from the Tomb of Giants speaks not to reasonable caution, but to fundamental failure of nerve that reveals the hollowness of their religious commitment. Their justifications for abandoning their mission, should they be encountered after their flight, demonstrate the way in which fear can corrupt even the most sacred obligations into exercises in self-serving rationalization. They speak of strategic withdrawal and tactical considerations, using the language of military planning to disguise what is essentially spiritual cowardice. The hollow fate that eventually claims them serves as cosmic justice for their betrayal of trust. Yet it also represents the tragedy of wasted potential. These men possessed genuine magical abilities and institutional knowledge that could have served the cause of light, yet their moral failures transformed them into cautionary tales about the importance of courage in religious life. Their presence in Firelink Shrine after their retreat creates an atmosphere of uncomfortable tension, as their survival depends upon the charity of those who might reasonably question whether they deserve such consideration. They become living reminders that religious authority means nothing without the moral courage to back up sacred obligations with personal sacrifice. In the towers of the undead parish dwells Oswald of Karim, the pardoner whose grim understanding of sin and absolution makes him one of the most philosophically complex figures in all the realm. His role as confessor to those who have committed crimes against other undead represents an attempt to maintain moral order in a world where traditional concepts of right and wrong have been rendered almost meaningless by the curse. Oswald's laughter, that distinctive sound that echoes through the bell tower whenever he discusses the darker aspects of human nature, reveals someone who has found a form of bitter humor in the contradictions and hypocrisies that define moral life in Lordran. His amusement is not cruel, but rather born from recognition that sin and virtue often wear each other's clothing in circumstances where survival depends upon actions that would be condemned in any healthier society. The pardoner's services represent both practical necessity and theological absurdity, as he offers forgiveness for crimes that may have been committed out of desperation rather than malice. Yet his authority to grant such forgiveness derives from institutions that may no longer exist in any meaningful sense. He serves gods who have fallen silent and represents a church whose earthly power has been reduced to ruins and memories. His knowledge of the various sins that undead commit against each other reveals someone who has made a comprehensive study of the ways in which the curse corrupts moral reasoning and transforms ordinary people into creatures capable of betrayal and violence. Yet his willingness to offer absolution for such crimes speaks to faith in the possibility of redemption that persists, despite overwhelming evidence that such faith may be misplaced. The pardoner's understanding of the relationship between guilt and hollowing provides insight into one of the curse's most insidious mechanisms. Those who commit acts that violate their fundamental moral principles find themselves consumed by self-hatred that accelerates their descent into mindless undeath, making absolution not merely a spiritual comfort, but a practical necessity for continued sanity. His presence in the bell tower, literally positioned between the earth and heaven, serves as physical manifestation of his role as intermediary between the mortal and divine realms. Yet, the silence that greets his prayers and the absence of any clear signs of divine approval for his activities emphasize the ambiguous nature of his authority and the uncertain value of the services he provides. Perhaps no figure in all of Lordran better embodies the complex relationship between wisdom and treachery than Patches, the notorious trickster, whose philosophy of survival through betrayal represents both the most cynical and most practical approach to existence in a cursed world. His various schemes and deceptions reveal someone who has achieved a form of enlightenment through complete abandonment of conventional moral constraints, yet his survival and continued relevance suggest that his approach may contain uncomfortable truths about the nature of reality in the post-divine age. Patch's understanding of greed as the fundamental human motivation allows him to predict and manipulate the behavior of others with remarkable accuracy, yet his own apparent immunity to the lure of treasure suggests someone who has transcended the very desires he exploits in others. His traps and betrayals serve not merely as means of eliminating competition, but as teaching tools designed to educate victims about the dangers of trusting others in situations where trust itself has become a luxury that few can afford. The trickster's survival across multiple encounters and his ability to reappear in various forms and locations speaks to adaptability that borders on the supernatural. Yet it also demonstrates the practical advantages that come from complete abandonment of pride and consistency, while others cling to images of themselves that prevent them from adapting to changed circumstances. Patches embraces whatever role or identity serves his immediate needs. His offers of assistance and friendship, always tinged with the possibility of betrayal, create relationships that are simultaneously genuine and completely untrustworthy. He provides valuable services and useful information, yet he does so in ways that keep recipients constantly aware that cooperation with Patches requires vigilance and preparation for eventual treachery. The philosophical consistency of Patch's worldview, his unwavering commitment to the principle that everyone will ultimately choose self-interest over loyalty when properly tested, makes him one of the most honest characters in the realm, despite his reputation for deception. He never pretends to be other than what he is, and his warnings about the dangers of trust serve as valuable preparation for the harsh realities of existence in Lordran. His role as teacher, whether intentional or accidental, transforms each of his betrayals into a lesson about the importance of self-reliance and the danger of depending too heavily upon others. Those who survive encounters with Patches often emerge stronger and wiser, having learned valuable lessons about human nature that serve them well in subsequent challenges. From the Great Swamp comes Laurentius, a pyromancer whose gentle nature and genuine desire to help others stands in stark contrast to the destructive power he commands and the dark origins of his chosen art. His rescue from the depths reveals someone who has retained essential humanity despite prolonged exposure to some of the most degraded and dangerous environments in all the realm. Yet his subsequent fate demonstrates the way in which even the purest intentions can lead to corruption when they encounter forces beyond their capacity to understand or control. Laurentius's mastery of pyromancy represents an approach to magic that is fundamentally different from the intellectual sorcery practiced in academic institutions or the divine miracles channeled through religious faith. His fire magic draws its power from the practitioner's own life force and emotional intensity, creating a direct connection between the inner state of the magician and the external manifestation of power that makes pyromancy both more personal and more dangerous than other magical disciplines. The pyromancer's willingness to share his knowledge freely with those who demonstrate interest in learning his art speaks to generosity of spirit that has somehow survived intact despite years of exposure to the worst aspects of human nature. His teaching methods emphasize respect for the flame and understanding of its dual nature as both creative and destructive force. Yet his warnings about the dangers of advanced pyromancy carry undertones of personal experience that suggest he has witnessed firsthand the corrupting effects of power pursued without wisdom. His interest in the chaos pyromancies that emerged from Isolith's failed attempt to recreate the first flame reveals the fatal curiosity that drives many scholars toward their doom. Yet in Laurentius's case, this interest seems motivated more by desire to help others than by personal ambition or lust for power. He seeks to understand chaos magic not because he wishes to wield it, but because he hopes to find ways to protect people from its corrupting influence. The pyromancer's potential corruption, should he learn of the existence of the Chaos Witch's flame, demonstrates the way in which even the most noble motivations can lead to destruction when they encounter forces that operate according to different moral logic. His transformation from helpful teacher into dangerous enemy represents not personal failure, but the inevitable result of engaging with powers that exist beyond the boundaries of human comprehension or control. His final fate, whether it involves corruption by chaos magic or simple disappearance from the world, serves as reminder that good intentions provide no protection against forces that view such intentions as irrelevant to their own alien purposes. The great swamp that produced him may reclaim him in the end, returning his essence to the primordial forces from which it originally emerged. These servants of faith and flame, in their various forms of devotion and corruption, preserve something essential about the human capacity for transcendence, while simultaneously demonstrating the prices that such transcendence demands. Their flames may flicker, and their gods may remain silent, yet their continued service speaks to something indestructible in the human spirit that refuses to abandon hope, even when hope has been revealed as delusion. Their sacred spaces, scattered throughout the realm and maintained through dedication that often exceeds rational justification, serve as beacons of meaning in a world where meaning has become increasingly difficult to sustain. The bonfires they tend and the miracles they perform continue to provide comfort and aid to those who desperately need both. Yet the cost of maintaining such service continues to mount with each passing age. Their various forms of sacrifice, from Anastasia's mutilation to Rhea's capture to Laurentius's potential corruption, reveal the way in which service to higher powers has become a form of spiritual martyrdom that may serve no purpose beyond the preservation of traditions that no longer connect to living realities. Yet their willingness to pay such prices, even in the absence of clear divine approval or reward, demonstrates faith that transcends rational calculation. and enters the realm of pure commitment to ideals that may be more important than the individuals who serve them. In their prayers and services, their teachings and sacrifices, these keepers of sacred flame preserve the memory of what religious devotion can accomplish when it is properly directed, while simultaneously warning about the dangers that await those who mistake the preservation of forms for the achievement of genuine spiritual connection. They remind us that faith without wisdom can become fanaticism, that service without understanding can become slavery, and that the most dangerous enemies of true religion are often those who claim to serve it most faithfully. In the shadowed corners of Lordran, where sanity goes to die and reason crumbles like ancient stone, dwell those souls who have been touched by forces too terrible for mortal minds to comprehend. These are the broken and the mad, the lost and the forsaken, beings who once possessed the full range of human thought and feeling, but who have been transformed by their encounters with truths too vast, losses too profound, or knowledge too dangerous for their consciousness to contain without fracturing into fragments that can never again be made whole. Their madness takes many forms, from the gibbering insanity of those who have gazed too long into the abyss, to the cold calculation of those who have abandoned all emotional connection to preserve what remains of their rational faculties. In their various forms of mental collapse and adaptation, they reveal the different ways in which the human psyche responds when confronted with realities that exceed its capacity to process or integrate, showing us both the fragility of consciousness and its remarkable ability to persist even when transformed beyond all recognition. Perhaps the most immediately recognizable of these broken souls is the crestfallen merchant who makes his meager living in the claustrophobic confines of Sen's fortress, that mechanical nightmare where death lurks behind every corner and survival depends upon perfect timing and unwavering concentration. His presence in this place of elaborate torment speaks to a form of despair so complete that even the constant threat of violent death seems preferable to the alternative of engaging with the wider world and its false promises of meaning and purpose. The merchant's observations about the futility of the chosen undead's quest carry the bitter wisdom of someone who has watched countless heroes enter the fortress with fire in their eyes and determination in their hearts, only to emerge as hollow shells if they emerge at all. His cynical commentary serves not as mere pessimism but as a form of protective armor against the constant disappointment that comes from hoping for outcomes that never materialize. His location deep within the fortress, positioned at a point where visitors have already survived numerous deadly traps and mechanical hazards, ensures that those who encounter him have already demonstrated both skill and determination. Yet his attitude toward these proven warriors remains one of profound skepticism. He has learned to distinguish between momentary competence and the kind of sustained excellence that true success requires, and his experience has taught him that the former is far more common than the latter. The goods he offers for sale speak to practical understanding of what adventurers actually need rather than what they imagine they want. His inventory focuses on consumables and basic equipment, rather than exotic weapons or powerful artifacts, reflecting his knowledge that survival in Sen's fortress depends more upon careful resource management than upon individual heroics or superior armament. His philosophical reflections on the nature of the undead curse and the futility of seeking to escape it through action reveal a mind that has achieved a form of clarity through complete abandonment of hope. He has embraced despair not as an emotional state but as an intellectual position, a rational response to circumstances that make optimism a form of delusion, and planning for the future an exercise in wishful thinking. The merchant's continued existence in the fortress, his ability to maintain his small business despite the constant dangers that surround him, demonstrates a form of stubborn persistence that transcends normal categories of courage and cowardice. He has found a way to function in an environment that breaks stronger souls, not through heroism but through the simple refusal to expect anything better than what he has already found. From the ranks of those who once served the Way of White comes Shiva of the East, a warrior whose desertion from the religious order that once claimed his loyalty speaks to the kind of disillusionment that can transform even the most dedicated servants of light into something darker and more pragmatic. His obsession with rare weapons and exotic armaments reveals someone who has transferred his need for transcendence from the spiritual realm to the material world, seeking in perfect craftsmanship the kind of meaning that religious devotion failed to provide. Shiva's role as leader of the Forest Hunter Covenant demonstrates his ability to organize and command others, despite having abandoned the institutional structures that once gave his life direction and purpose. His new allegiance serves practical needs rather than spiritual ones, providing protection for those who seek to preserve the forest's ancient mysteries while offering him the resources and authority necessary to pursue his collecting obsession. The warrior's knowledge of weapon craftsmanship and his ability to recognize the historical significance of different pieces reveals someone whose madness has taken the form of obsessive scholarship rather than complete mental collapse. He has channeled his need for meaning into the study and acquisition of objects that represent human achievement in its most refined forms, finding in swords and armor the kind of perfection that the divine realm failed to deliver. His eventual betrayal of those who trust him, should circumstances create conflicts between his collecting goals and his covenant obligations, reveals the way in which obsession can corrupt even positive impulses toward leadership and protection. The weapons he covets become more important to him than the people who wield them, transforming relationships that should be based upon mutual benefit into opportunities for exploitation and theft. The ninja who serves as Shiva's bodyguard and eventual executioner represents the logical extension of his paranoid worldview, a fail-safe mechanism designed to ensure that his secrets and treasures never fall into the wrong hands. This relationship demonstrates the way in which obsessive collecting can become a form of spiritual imprisonment, where the collector becomes enslaved to his collection and must sacrifice increasingly important things to maintain possession of objects that may have no intrinsic value beyond their rarity. His knowledge of the various schools of weapon making and their distinctive characteristics speaks to genuine expertise that has been developed through years of dedicated study. Yet this knowledge serves primarily to feed his obsession, rather than to contribute anything meaningful to the broader understanding of martial arts or craftsmanship. He has become a living catalogue of information that benefits no one but himself. In the depths of Darkroot Garden, where ancient trees whisper secrets that predate human memory, and the very air seems thick with mysteries that were old when the world was young, dwells Alvina, the cat whose feline nature serves as both blessing and curse in her interactions with the various factions that seek to control or influence the forest's destiny. Her apparent madness takes the form of manipulative cunning that treats other beings as pieces in games whose rules only she fully understands. Alvina's role as covenant leader for the forest hunters reveals someone who has learned to exploit the protective instincts of others while maintaining complete emotional detachment from their fates. She offers membership in an organization that promises fellowship and shared purpose, yet her true interest lies in using the Covenant's members to advance her own mysterious agenda, rather than in providing them with the sense of belonging they seek. The cat's knowledge of Ulusile's history and her connection to the events that led to the Abyss disaster position her as one of the few beings who possesses first-hand understanding of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. Her perspective spans centuries or perhaps millennia, giving her insight into the cyclical nature of rise and fall that characterizes human civilization. Yet this knowledge has bred in her a cynical detachment that views individual suffering as irrelevant to larger patterns. Her manipulation of the player character and other Covenant members demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human psychology and motivation, yet she applies this knowledge in ways that serve her own purposes rather than those of the people she claims to protect. Her offers of assistance and friendship carry undertones of calculation that suggest every interaction is being evaluated for its potential utility rather than its intrinsic value. The cat's presence in the garden, her role as guardian of secrets that may predate the current age of gods and mortals, speaks to responsibilities that extend far beyond normal categories of loyalty or betrayal. She serves powers and purposes that operate according to logic that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend, making her apparent madness perhaps the only rational response to obligations that exceed human understanding. Her knowledge of the Covenant of Artorias and her connection to the events surrounding the Abyss Walker's mission reveals someone who has been intimately involved in some of the most significant events in Lordran's history. Yet she speaks of these matters with the detached interest of a scholar rather than the emotional investment of someone who was personally affected by their outcomes. Deep in the blighted depths of Blighttown, where poison drips from every surface and the very air seems to burn with corruption, dwells the Fair Lady, sister to the Chaos Witch Quelag, whose transformation into something barely recognizable as human represents one of the most tragic consequences of Izalith's failed attempt to recreate the First Flame. Her madness takes the form of gentle acceptance, a serene embrace of her corrupted condition that speaks to spiritual transcendence, achieved through complete surrender to forces beyond her control. The Fair Lady's diseased condition, her body consumed by the very chaos magic that her mother sought to harness for the benefit of all, serves as living reminder of the prices that must sometimes be paid for ambitious attempts to manipulate fundamental forces of creation. Her acceptance of her fate demonstrates a form of wisdom that has moved beyond resentment or regret into something approaching enlightenment. Yet this wisdom comes at the cost of everything that once made her recognizably human. Her ability to understand and communicate with those who bring her humanity reveals consciousness that operates according to different principles than normal human awareness. Yet her gratitude for such offerings suggests that some essential core of her personality remains intact, despite her physical transformation. She has become something that exists between life and death, sanity and madness. Yet she retains enough of her original nature to appreciate kindness when it is offered. The Fair Lady's role as object of Kirk's devotion demonstrates her ability to inspire protective instincts in others despite her corrupted appearance, suggesting that her essential goodness remains visible to those who possess the sensitivity to perceive it. Her silent suffering calls forth responses from unlikely sources, transforming even the most hardened warriors into gentle caregivers who find meaning in service to someone who can never adequately reward their devotion. Her knowledge of the chaos magic that has consumed her body and the events that led to her transformation have positioned her as one of the few surviving witnesses to Izalith's great disaster. Yet her inability or unwillingness to speak of these matters in detail suggests either protective amnesia or conscious choice to shield others from knowledge that might prove as corrupting as the magic itself. The humanity offerings that ease her suffering serve both practical and symbolic functions, providing temporary relief from her condition, while simultaneously representing the connection between her corrupted state and the fundamental essence of human existence. Her consumption of these offerings speaks to hunger that operates on spiritual as well as physical levels, a need that goes beyond mere sustenance into realms of meaning and connection. Beside the Fair Lady, serves Ingi, whose own corruption by the chaos magic has taken a different form, transforming him into something that is simultaneously more and less than human, while leaving his devotion to his mistress as the single fixed point around which his shattered identity revolves. His egg-like growths and parasitic infestations represent the physical manifestation of spiritual contamination that has rewritten the fundamental structure of his being. Ainyi's mastery of toxic pyromancies reveals someone who has learned to find power in his own corruption, transforming the very forces that have destroyed his humanity into weapons that can be used to protect the one thing in the world that still has meaning for him. His magic draws its strength from disease and decay rather than the vital fires that power conventional pyromancy. Yet in his hands, these corrupted flames become tools of devotion and protection. The servant's knowledge of the fair lady's condition and his understanding of the treatments that can provide her with temporary relief demonstrate practical wisdom, born from long experience with the management of impossible situations. He has learned to work within the constraints of her corruption rather than fighting against them, finding ways to maximize her comfort and dignity, despite circumstances that would reduce most beings to mindless suffering. His willingness to share his forbidden pyromancies with those who demonstrate proper respect for his mistress reveals someone who has maintained enough connection to normal human values to recognize genuine compassion when he encounters it. His teaching serves both as reward for kindness and as means of ensuring that his knowledge will survive even if his own corrupted existence comes to an end. The servant's origins and his path to his current condition remain shrouded in mystery, yet his complete dedication to the fair lady's welfare suggests that his corruption may have been voluntary, a conscious choice to accept transformation rather than abandon someone who needed his help. His sacrifice represents the kind of love that transcends normal categories of self-preservation and rational calculation. His presence in the toxic swamp that surrounds the fair lady's chamber serves as both protection and isolation, ensuring that casual visitors cannot easily reach his mistress, while simultaneously cutting them off from normal contact with the outside world. He has chosen exile and corruption over safety and normalcy, finding in service to the suffering a form of meaning that conventional life failed to provide. From the ruins of Izalith itself comes Quelana, the witch of Izalith's daughter who survived the chaos disaster, but carries with her the unbearable weight of knowledge about her family's role in creating the very forces that continue to corrupt and destroy everything they command. Touch. Her madness manifests as guilt so profound that it has become the organizing principle around which her entire existence revolves, transforming every interaction into an opportunity for penance and self-punishment. Quelana's mastery of pyromancy and her role as the art's ultimate teacher represent both achievement and tragedy, as she possesses knowledge that could benefit countless students, yet cannot share it without also passing on the burden of understanding how such power can be misused. Her teachings carry within them warnings about the dangers of chaos magic that are born from personal experience with its most devastating applications. The witch's voluntary exile from her family and her rejection of the chaos magic that has consumed her mother and sisters demonstrate moral clarity that has survived intact despite exposure to corruption that has destroyed stronger souls. She has chosen isolation and guilt over participation in activities that she knows to be fundamentally wrong. Yet this choice has left her completely alone in a world where loneliness itself can drive beings to madness. Her knowledge of the events that led to the Izalith disaster and her understanding of the ongoing threat posed by the Chaos Flame position her as one of the few beings capable of providing accurate information about forces that continue to shape Lordran's fate. Yet her guilt over her family's role in creating these problems makes her reluctant to share this knowledge except under the most extreme circumstances. The pyromancy teacher's relationship with students who seek her instruction reveals someone who has learned to find meaning in the act of teaching itself, rather than in the outcomes that such teaching produces. She shares her knowledge freely, while simultaneously warning about its dangers, understanding that education is both gift and burden that cannot be given without also imposing responsibilities that may prove too heavy for the recipient to bear. Her continued existence in the swamps of Blighttown, her choice to remain close to the chaos that her family created, speaks to a form of self-imposed exile that serves as both punishment and vigil. She watches over the disaster that her mother's ambitions produced, ensuring that its effects do not spread beyond their current boundaries while simultaneously accepting personal responsibility for consequences that were never truly under her control. These broken and mad souls, in their various forms of mental collapse and adaptation, preserve something essential about the human capacity to find meaning even in the most degraded circumstances. Yet they also demonstrate the terrible prices that consciousness must sometimes pay when it encounters forces that exceed its ability to comprehend or integrate. Their madness serves both as warning and as testimony to the resilience of awareness that refuses to be completely extinguished even when transformed beyond all recognition. Their presence throughout the realm creates an atmosphere of constant unease, a reminder that sanity itself is a fragile construction that depends upon circumstances remaining within acceptable parameters. When those parameters are violated by exposure to cosmic forces or unbearable losses, the mind finds ways to adapt that may preserve some essential core of identity, while sacrificing everything that makes that identity recognizable to others. In their various forms of wisdom and delusion, these mad souls serve as guides to territories of experience that normal consciousness cannot safely explore. Yet their guidance comes at the cost of credibility and comprehension that makes their insights as likely to mislead as to illuminate. They speak truths that sane minds cannot accept and offer solutions to problems that may not actually exist. Yet their perspectives sometimes provide the only available alternatives to worldviews that have proven themselves inadequate to address the realities of existence in a cursed realm. In the ancient places where metal meets flame and craft transcends mere artistry to become something approaching divine creation, stand those eternal guardians whose dedication to their work has elevated them beyond the normal boundaries of mortality and profession. These are the keepers of sacred knowledge, the preservers of ancient techniques, and the watchers who maintain vigil over powers and secrets that predate the current age by spans of time so vast that their origins have become matters of legend rather than history. Their presence throughout the realm serves as a reminder that some forms of service transcend the individual will and personal ambition, reaching into territories where duty becomes indistinguishable from nature and commitment transforms into something that operates according to laws deeper than those that govern normal human existence. In their various forms of guardianship and protection, they embody the principle that true mastery requires not merely skill, but complete surrender to purposes larger than any single life or consciousness. At the heart of the undead parish, where the sound of hammer striking anvil echoes through stone corridors that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless generations, stands Andre of Astora, the blacksmith whose craft represents more than mere metalworking, but serves as connection to divine forces that shape the world in its earliest ages. His presence at his forge speaks to dedication so complete that it has become indistinguishable from his essential being, transforming him into something that exists as much as embodiment of craftsmanship as individual personality. Andre's mastery of weapon enhancement and his knowledge of the various materials and techniques required to improve equipment reveals someone whose understanding encompasses not merely the practical aspects of smithing, but the deeper principles that govern the relationship between physical objects and the spiritual forces they can channel. His work bridges the gap between the mundane and the sacred, creating tools that serve not merely as implements of warfare, but as conduits for powers that transcend normal material limitations. The blacksmith's knowledge of divine weapons and his ability to channel the power of the gods into metal and stone speaks to connections that extend far beyond normal professional relationships between craftsman and patron. His techniques draw upon traditions that were established when the divine realm maintained direct contact with the mortal world, preserving methods and knowledge that might otherwise have been lost when the gods withdrew from active participation in earthly affairs. His conversations with those who seek his services reveal someone who has achieved a form of philosophical acceptance that allows him to work with equal dedication, regardless of whether his efforts serve the cause of light or darkness. His craft exists independent of moral considerations, recognizing that the same techniques that can create weapons of justice can also produce instruments of oppression, yet his personal commitment remains fixed upon the excellence of his work, rather than the purposes to which it might be applied. Andre's presence throughout the various trials and transformations that mark the progression of ages speaks to a form of continuity that transcends normal categories of life and death, permanence and change. His forge continues to burn regardless of what kingdoms rise or fall around it. His hammer continues to ring against the anvil regardless of what wars are fought or won, suggesting that his role serves purposes that operate according to timescales that exceed individual human comprehension. The ember that powers his forge and enables his most advanced work represents connection to forces that predate the current age of fire, linking his craft to primordial sources of power that have remained constant despite all the changes that have transformed the world around them. His ability to channel these forces through his work marks him as keeper of knowledge that bridges different eras of creation, preserving techniques that connect contemporary needs to ancient wisdom. High in the gleaming halls of Anor Londo, where light itself seems to take physical form, and the very architecture speaks of power that operates beyond normal human limitations, labors the giant blacksmith, whose immense size and strength enable him to work with materials and create objects that would be impossible for beings of ordinary stature to handle. His dedication to his craft has continued unchanged, despite the departure of the gods he was created to serve, demonstrating loyalty that persists even when its original objects have moved beyond the reach of normal devotion. The giant's mastery of divine weapons and his ability to create and modify equipment that channels the power of the gods reveals someone whose entire existence has been shaped by service to purposes that transcend his individual will or desire. His techniques represent the pinnacle of smithing achievement, creating weapons and tools that embody divine power in forms that can be wielded by mortal hands. Yet his knowledge extends beyond mere technical proficiency into understanding of the spiritual principles that make such channeling possible. His continued work in the empty halls of Anor Londo, his persistence in maintaining his forge despite the absence of the patrons who once gave his craft its primary meaning, speaks to dedication that has moved beyond rational calculation into realms where duty becomes a form of prayer and craftsmanship becomes a means of preserving connection to divine principles even when the gods themselves have withdrawn from active participation in earthly affairs. The giant's knowledge of the various divine souls and their applications in weapon enhancement reveals understanding that encompasses not merely the practical aspects of enchantment, but the deeper metaphysical principles that govern the relationship between spiritual essence and material form. His ability to work with these souls demonstrates mastery of techniques that blur the line between craftsmanship and magic, creating objects that serve as permanent embodiments of power that might otherwise exist only in transient forms. His reactions to visitors and his willingness to share his services with those who demonstrate proper appreciation for his work reveals someone whose isolation has not bred bitterness or resentment, but rather a form of patient acceptance that finds meaning in the act of creation itself. His craft continues to serve purposes that justify his existence, even when those purposes no longer connect to the grand designs that originally gave his life direction and meaning. The tools and materials scattered throughout his workshop tell stories of projects that span centuries or millennia, representing continuity of purpose that extends far beyond normal human timescales. His work preserves techniques and knowledge that might otherwise be lost, ensuring that the capacity to create divine weapons will survive, even if the gods who originally inspired such creations never return to claim them. From the depths beneath Firelink Shrine emerge the primordial serpents, ancient beings whose knowledge and agenda span ages so vast that their true purposes remain incomprehensible to minds that operate according to more limited temporal perspectives. Kingseeker Frampt and Darkstalker Kathy represent opposing approaches to the fundamental questions that define existence in the current age, yet their rivalry serves interests that may transcend the apparent conflict between their stated goals. Frampt's role as guide to those who would link the fire and preserve the current age reveals someone whose understanding of cosmic forces enables him to manipulate events across vast spans of time, orchestrating outcomes that serve purposes too complex for normal human consciousness to fully grasp. His advice and assistance come with costs and implications that extend far beyond the immediate benefits they provide, creating relationships of dependence that transform those he helps into instruments of his larger agenda. The Kingseeker's knowledge of the Lord Vessel and its significance in the larger struggle between light and dark positions him as keeper of information that could determine the fate of the current age. Yet his willingness to share this knowledge comes with obligations and expectations that bind recipients to purposes they may not fully understand. His guidance represents both gift and trap, providing essential assistance, while simultaneously ensuring that those who benefit from his help serve his ultimate goals, whether they intend to or not. His ability to consume large quantities of souls and titanite demonstrates appetite that operates according to principles different from normal biological need, suggesting that his existence depends upon resources that connect him to the fundamental forces that shape reality itself. His consumption serves purposes that extend beyond mere sustenance into realms where eating becomes a form of spiritual communion with the essential nature of existence. Frampt's presence in the depths beneath the shrine and his connection to the mechanisms that enable access to the kiln of the first flame reveals someone whose role encompasses not merely advice and guidance, but active participation in the cosmic machinery that determines whether the current age continues or gives way to something fundamentally different. His influence operates through channels that bypass normal political and social structures, working directly with the forces that shape reality at its most basic levels. The serpent's reactions to different choices made by those he guides reveal flexibility that suggests his ultimate agenda may be more complex than his stated preference for linking the fire would indicate. His willingness to work with various outcomes and his ability to find advantage in apparently contradictory developments speak to understanding that operates according to logic too sophisticated for normal human comprehension to follow. Completely, Darkstalker Carthy presents an alternative perspective on the fundamental questions that define the current age, advocating for the emergence of an age of dark that would represent not destruction but transformation, a fundamental shift in the principles that govern existence, rather than mere continuation of current patterns under different management. His knowledge of humanity's true nature and potential reveals understanding that challenges the assumptions upon which the current cosmic order depends. Carthy's revelation of the truth about the first flame and the nature of the linking ritual exposes the degree to which conventional wisdom about the cosmic order may be based upon deceptions designed to serve the interests of those who benefit from existing arrangements rather than accurate understanding of the forces involved. His alternative interpretation of history and prophecy provides context that reframes apparently noble actions as forms of manipulation and exploitation. The Darkstalker's knowledge of the furtive pygmy and the true nature of humanity positions him as keeper of secrets that could fundamentally alter the balance of power between the various factions that compete for control over the realm's destiny. His willingness to share this information with those who demonstrate readiness to hear it represents both gift and burden, providing enlightenment that comes with responsibilities and dangers that may exceed the recipient's capacity to handle safely. His role in the New Londo incident and his relationship with the Four Kings reveals someone whose influence has shaped major historical events. Yet his involvement in these matters raises questions about the true nature of his agenda and the ultimate consequences of following his guidance. His assistance comes with costs that may not become apparent until long after the initial benefits have been received and accepted. Carthy's ability to teach advanced dark magic and his knowledge of the covenant that bears his name demonstrate connection to forces that operate according to principles different from those that govern conventional magic and political organization. His teachings provide access to power that draws upon humanity's essential nature rather than borrowed divine authority. Yet this power comes with risks and temptations that may prove as dangerous as any external threat. The serpent's presence in the abyss and his survival of the forces that consume New Londo speak to resilience and adaptability that enable him to thrive in environments that would destroy beings dependent upon more conventional forms of existence. His ability to operate in realms where normal reality breaks down reveals mastery of principles that transcend the limitations that constrain most other forms of consciousness. Beyond the immediate vicinity of human civilization, in places where the natural world maintains forms and patterns that predate the current age of gods and mortals, dwell guardians whose protection extends to territories and principles that exist independent of human political arrangements. The undead asylum demon, first of many such creatures that challenge those who would venture beyond safe boundaries, represents the testing function that determines whether travelers possess the strength and determination necessary to survive in the larger world. The demon's role as guardian of the asylum serves purposes that extend beyond mere imprisonment or punishment, functioning as a form of examination that separates those who possess genuine heroic potential from those who merely imagine themselves capable of great deeds. Its presence ensures that only the truly prepared can escape the controlled environment of the asylum to face the far greater challenges that await in the wider realm. The creature's considerable size and strength, combined with its primitive yet effective combat techniques, provide a relatively straightforward test that nevertheless requires genuine skill and determination to overcome. Its defeat marks the first major victory for those who would become heroes, establishing patterns of accomplishment and self-confidence that will prove essential for survival in more complex and dangerous situations. The bell gargoyles who guard the parish church represent a different form of protective function, serving as sentinels whose role encompasses not merely defense of a specific location, but preservation of the ritual functions that maintain connection between the earthly and divine realms. Their presence ensures that only those who demonstrate proper respect and capability can access the sacred mechanisms that enable communication with powers beyond normal human reach. The gargoyles' coordination and their ability to function as a team while maintaining individual tactical flexibility demonstrate intelligence and training that exceed mere animal cunning, suggesting that their role as guardians involves conscious choice and commitment, rather than simple instinctual response to territorial intrusion. Their defeat represents victory over opponents who chose to oppose progress, rather than beings who merely happened to be in the way. Their connection to the bell-ringing ritual and their integration into the larger cosmic machinery that responds to such rituals reveal guardians whose function encompasses not merely protection, but active participation in maintaining the systems that preserve order and meaning in a world where both are constantly threatened by forces of dissolution and chaos. From the depths of the Darkroot Garden comes the legend of Havel the Rock, the warrior whose opposition to Seath's crystalline sorceries led to imprisonment that has lasted far longer than any normal lifespan could encompass. His presence behind locked doors speaks to the way in which even the mightiest champions can be neutralized through political maneuvering rather than direct confrontation, demonstrating that physical prowess alone provides insufficient protection against enemies who possess superior strategic position. Havel's distinctive armor and weapons represent the pinnacle of protective equipment, crafted to provide defense against the specific types of magical assault that Seath favored, yet his imprisonment reveals the limitations of even perfect preparation. When facing opponents who possess the political authority to bypass direct confrontation entirely, his story serves as warning about the importance of understanding not merely the technical aspects of conflict, but the larger context within which such conflicts unfold. The warrior's continued existence, despite prolonged imprisonment, speaks to constitution and determination that border on the supernatural, suggesting that his opposition to Seath's research was motivated by understanding that transcended normal political or personal considerations. His resistance to the Duke's experiments may have been based upon insights into the ultimate consequences of such research that proved accurate, despite being dismissed by those in authority. His knowledge of anti-magic techniques and his mastery of equipment designed to counter sorcerous attacks position him as keeper of knowledge that could prove essential for those who must face similar threats. Yet his isolation has prevented him from sharing this expertise with those who might benefit from it. His imprisonment represents not merely personal tragedy but loss of resources that could serve the cause of opposing dangerous magical experimentation. The key that secures his prison and the identity of those who possess the authority to release him reveal the degree to which his fate depends upon political considerations, rather than questions of justice or practical necessity. His continued confinement serves interests that may have more to do with maintaining existing power structures than with any legitimate concern about the dangers he might pose if released. These guardians and protectors, in their various forms of service and dedication, preserve something essential about the principle that some things are worth defending regardless of personal cost or individual benefit. Their presence throughout the realm creates networks of protection and preservation that ensure the survival of knowledge, techniques, and principles that might otherwise be lost to the forces of change and decay that constantly threaten to reduce everything to chaos and meaninglessness. Their workshops and forges, their sacred spaces and hidden chambers, serve as repositories of wisdom and capability that connect the present age to earlier periods when the relationship between mortal effort and cosmic purpose was more direct and comprehensible. In their various forms of mastery and guardianship, they embody the principle that true achievement requires not merely individual excellence but commitment to purposes that transcend personal ambition and individual survival. Yet their stories also reveal the costs and complications that such dedication involves, showing how service to larger purposes can become a form of imprisonment when circumstances change in ways that make original goals impossible to achieve or irrelevant to current needs. Their continued devotion to duties that may no longer serve living purposes demonstrates both the nobility of absolute commitment and the potential tragedy of loyalty that persists beyond the point where it can produce meaningful results. In their various forms of wisdom and limitation, these eternal guardians serve as bridges between different ages and different forms of understanding, preserving connections to powers and principles that might otherwise be completely forgotten while simultaneously demonstrating the difficulties involved in maintaining such connections across the vast spans of time that separate creation from current reality. In the highest halls of power and the deepest chambers of ancient authority, where decisions were once made that shaped the fundamental nature of reality itself, there dwell the remnants of those who commanded the great souls that lit the world in its earliest age. These are the lords and fallen royalty, beings whose power once transcended mortal understanding but who now exist as shadows of their former glory, transformed by time and circumstance into monuments to the inevitable decay that claims even the mightiest achievements when the forces that created them begin to fade. Their stories speak to the ultimate futility of earthly power when confronted with cosmic forces that operate according to principles beyond political control or individual will. Yet they also demonstrate the tragic nobility that can emerge when beings of great authority choose to sacrifice everything they possess in service of purposes larger than their own preservation. In their various forms of diminishment and persistence, they embody both the heights that conscious beings can reach and the depths to which they must sometimes descend when the structures that once gave their existence meaning begin to crumble around them. At the very apex of this hierarchy of faded glory stands Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, whose sacrifice to preserve the Age of Fire represents both the greatest act of heroism in recorded history and the most profound tragedy, transforming the mightiest being of his era into a hollow guardian whose continued existence serves as reminder of what must be surrendered when duty demands the ultimate price. His presence in the kiln of the first flame speaks to dedication so complete that it has consumed not merely his physical form but his essential identity, leaving behind only the burned-out shell of someone who once commanded the very forces that shape reality. Gwyn's decision to kindle the first flame with his own soul marked the beginning of the current age's slow decline, establishing a precedent that would define the cosmic order for millennia to come. His transformation from Lord of Lightning into Lord of Cinder reveals the way in which even divine power proves insufficient when confronted with fundamental forces of entropy and decay. Yet his willingness to accept this transformation demonstrates commitment to purposes that transcend personal survival or individual glory. The Lord of Cinder's hollow state, when finally encountered, represents not failure but the logical conclusion of absolute service, showing what remains when someone surrenders everything that makes them who they are, in service of principles they believe to be more important than their own existence. His attacks retain echoes of the lightning mastery that once made him the most feared warrior in all creation. Yet these remnants of power serve now only to defend a flame whose preservation has cost him everything that once made such defense meaningful. His presence in the kiln, surrounded by the ashes of his former knights and the remnants of his once mighty army, creates an atmosphere of profound melancholy that speaks to the loneliness inherent in ultimate responsibility. He has outlived everyone and everything he once cared about. His sacrifice preserving an age that no longer contains anything that makes such preservation personally meaningful to him, yet his duty continues to compel his guardianship, long after any rational justification for such service has disappeared. The music that accompanies encounters with this fallen lord captures something essential about the tragedy of noble sacrifice, conveying both the grandeur of what he once represented and the profound sadness of what he has become. His battle represents not conquest over an enemy, but a form of mercy killing, releasing someone whose existence has become nothing more than an endless repetition of obligations that no longer connect to living purposes. The soul that remains after his defeat carries within it the concentrated essence of what he sacrificed to preserve the current age. Yet this essence serves primarily to demonstrate the magnitude of what was lost, rather than to provide any meaningful compensation for such sacrifice. His legacy lives on in the structures and principles that his actions established, yet these achievements feel hollow when measured against the personal cost their creation required. Deep in the ruins of Izalith, where failed ambition has transformed paradise into hell, and noble intentions have given birth to horrors that defy classification, dwells the Witch of Izalith, whose attempt to recreate the first flame stands as perhaps the most catastrophic magical experiment in recorded history. Her transformation into the bed of chaos represents the ultimate corruption of creative power, showing how the desire to build and preserve can become the source of destruction and corruption when it exceeds the boundaries of wisdom and restraint. The witch's motivation for attempting to recreate the first flame speaks to understanding of cosmic forces that was both profound and fatally incomplete, recognizing the importance of preserving the current age while failing to grasp the full implications of the methods she chose to employ. Her magical expertise enabled her to manipulate forces that should have remained beyond mortal reach, yet her knowledge proved insufficient to control the consequences of her intervention. Her transformation into something that barely retains recognizable consciousness reveals the way in which magical power can become a curse when it exceeds the wielder's capacity to direct it safely, consuming not merely the practitioner's physical form, but their essential identity and moral purpose. The bed of chaos represents what remains when ambition and ability combine without sufficient wisdom to guide their application. The demons that emerged from her failed experiment serve as living monuments to the unintended consequences of magical research conducted without adequate understanding of the forces involved. Yet they also demonstrate the way in which creative power continues to operate, even when it has been corrupted beyond all recognition. Her legacy of destruction continues to generate new forms of life, albeit forms that serve no constructive purpose and contribute nothing positive to the world's development. The chaos flame that she accidentally created has become a source of ongoing corruption and danger, spreading its influence through channels that she never intended to open, and affecting regions that were never meant to be touched by such power. Her attempt to solve one problem has created dozens of new ones, each potentially more dangerous than the original threat she sought to address. The daughters who survived her transformation carry within themselves both her magical legacy and the burden of knowledge about the true cost of their mother's ambitions, forced to live with the constant reminder of how good intentions can lead to catastrophic results when combined with insufficient understanding of the forces being manipulated. In the deepest catacombs where death itself has found its dwelling place, rules Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, whose dominion over the realm of endings represents both natural authority and cosmic responsibility that extends far beyond normal categories of political power or territorial control. His presence in the Tomb of Giants speaks to sovereignty that derives its legitimacy from fundamental forces rather than conventional structures of law and governance. Nito's role as Lord of Death positions him as guardian of one of the most essential functions in the cosmic order, ensuring that the cycle of life and death continues to operate according to principles that maintain balance between creation and destruction. His authority extends not merely over the physical process of dying, but over the spiritual and metaphysical dimensions of transition between different states of existence. The necromancers who serve him and the skeletons that populate his domain demonstrate his ability to command not merely the dead but the forces that govern the relationship between life and death, creating an army that serves purposes beyond normal military considerations. His servants exist in states that blur the boundaries between existence and non-existence, demonstrating mastery of principles that transcend normal biological limitations. His covenant with the living reveals understanding that death and life are complementary rather than opposing forces, each dependent upon the other for meaning and context. His willingness to share some of his power with those who demonstrate proper respect for his authority speaks to wisdom that recognizes cooperation as more effective than domination for achieving long-term stability. The tomb that serves as his seat of power creates an environment where normal rules of physics and causality operate differently, reflecting his mastery of forces that exist beyond conventional material constraints. His presence transforms the very nature of space and time in his vicinity, creating a realm where death and undeath coexist according to principles that he has established and maintains. His eventual conflict with those who would challenge his authority represents not personal animosity, but the inevitable clash between different approaches to managing the forces that govern existence and non-existence. His defeat marks the end of an era during which death operated according to established principles, rather than the chaos and unpredictability that characterizes the current age. High in the crystal caves where madness has found its perfect expression in architectural form, dwells Seath the Scaleless, the dragon whose betrayal of his own kind secured victory for the gods in the ancient war, yet whose reward has proven to be a form of imprisonment more complete and terrible than any punishment his enemies might have devised. His obsession with immortality and his crystalline experiments represent the logical endpoint of intellectual curiosity, divorced from moral restraint or practical wisdom. Seath's unique position as the only dragon to survive the transition from the Age of Ancients to the Age of Fire speaks to adaptability that enabled him to recognize changing circumstances and adjust his loyalties accordingly, yet his survival has come at the cost of everything that once connected him to his original nature and purpose. His betrayal of the other dragons secured his physical existence, while destroying his spiritual and emotional connection to everything that had previously given that existence meaning. His crystalline research and his experiments with various forms of life represent attempts to understand and control the fundamental forces that govern existence, yet his methods reveal someone whose pursuit of knowledge has become completely divorced from any consideration of the welfare of his test subjects. His laboratories are filled with the results of experiments that prioritize advancement of understanding over basic ethical considerations. The Duke's archives that serve as his seat of power demonstrate intellectual achievement that rivals anything accomplished by mortal scholars, yet this achievement has been purchased through methods that transform learning into a form of systematic cruelty. His knowledge encompasses subjects that no other being has mastered, yet this expertise serves primarily to enable more sophisticated forms of exploitation and abuse. His madness manifests not as chaotic irrationality, but as cold logic that has been freed from all moral constraints, creating a form of sanity that is more terrifying than conventional insanity because of its internal consistency and practical effectiveness. His experiments produce results that advance his research objectives while simultaneously revealing the moral vacuum at the center of his intellectual pursuits. The crystals that fill his domain serve both as tools for his research and as physical manifestations of his mental state, creating an environment where everything reflects the cold, beautiful, and ultimately sterile perfection that he has chosen to pursue, instead of the messy vitality that characterizes normal existence. Beneath the flooded ruins of New Londo dwell the four kings, whose fall from royal authority to servants of the abyss represents one of the most complete moral and spiritual collapses in recorded history. Their transformation from rulers dedicated to the welfare of their subjects into creatures whose very existence threatens everything they once protected demonstrates the way in which power can become corruption when it encounters forces that operate according to alien principles. The king's original rule over New Londo appears to have been benevolent and effective, creating prosperity and security that made their domain one of the most desirable places to live in all the realm. Yet, their encounter with the primordial serpent Cathy began a process of corruption that ultimately consumed not only their individual souls, but the entire civilization they had built. Their acceptance of the dark soul fragments that Cathy offered represents the kind of Faustian bargain that appears attractive in its initial stages, but reveals its true cost only after the transaction has been completed and its consequences have become irreversible. The power they gained enabled them to transcend normal human limitations while simultaneously destroying everything that had made such transcendence desirable. Their transformation into beings of pure dark hunger illustrates the way in which political authority can become meaningless when the rulers lose connection to the human concerns and values that originally justified their positions. They retained their power while abandoning all memory of the purposes that such power was meant to serve. The flooding of New Londo and the sacrifice of its entire population represent the ultimate judgment upon their failure as leaders, yet this catastrophic response to their corruption also demonstrates the degree to which their transformation threatened forces beyond their own domain. Their fall required intervention so dramatic that it destroyed everything they had built rather than allowing their corruption to spread. Their continued existence in the flooded ruins speaks to persistence that has moved beyond life and death into realms where normal categories of existence no longer apply. Yet this persistence serves no constructive purpose beyond the preservation of threat and suffering. From the woods where shadows dance with memories of ancient heroism comes the legend of Artorias of the Abyss Walker whose covenant with the forces of darkness was meant to protect him from corruption, but instead became the instrument of his transformation into something that embodies the very evil he sought to combat. His story represents perhaps the purest example of heroic intention perverted by forces beyond the hero's capacity to understand or control. Artorias' original mission to contain the spreading corruption of Ulasil speaks to courage and dedication that placed duty above personal safety, yet his approach to the problem reveals the kind of noble overconfidence that assumes good intentions and pure motives provide sufficient protection against cosmic forces that operate according to their own alien logic. His mastery of combat techniques and his reputation as one of the greatest warriors of his generation made him seem like the ideal choice for a mission that required not merely fighting skill, but spiritual strength capable of resisting corruption. Yet his ultimate fate demonstrates the inadequacy of even perfect preparation when facing enemies that attack identity itself rather than mere physical form. The covenant of Artorias that was meant to protect him from the abyss's influence represents both sophisticated understanding of magical protection and fatal misunderstanding of the true nature of the forces involved, providing defense against some forms of corruption while leaving him vulnerable to others that proved more subtle and ultimately more effective. His transformation into a berserker whose fighting style retains echoes of his former skill while serving completely different purposes illustrates the way in which the abyss corrupts not by destroying what it touches, but by turning strength into weakness and virtue into vice. He remains recognizably himself while simultaneously becoming everything he once opposed. The great sword that bears his name and the techniques associated with his fighting style preserve something of his legacy, while simultaneously serving as reminders of what was lost when corruption claimed someone who had seemed beyond the pace, reach of such influence. His weapons and armor tell stories of nobility that make his fall all the more tragic. His faithful wolf companion, Sif, left to guard his grave and prevent others from suffering his fate, represents loyalty that persists beyond death and friendship, that transcends the corruption of its original object. The wolf's vigil speaks to the kind of devotion that can survive even when its focus has been transformed into something that would horrify the original recipient of such loyalty. In the painted world where exiles find their only refuge, moves the graceful and terrible figure of Lord's Blade Ciaran, the assassin whose skills once served the gods, but who has chosen isolation and contemplation over continued service to powers that failed to protect those she cared about most. Her presence in this realm of outcasts speaks to grief so profound that it has transformed someone whose life was once defined by action and purpose into a figure whose primary activity is the preservation of memory and the maintenance of shrine to loss. Ciaran's mastery of assassination techniques and her reputation as one of the most feared members of Gwyn's inner circle reveals someone whose entire identity was once built around service to causes larger than herself. Yet her withdrawal from active participation in the cosmic struggles that continue to rage demonstrates how completely personal loss can undermine even the most dedicated forms of professional commitment. Her love for Artorias and her knowledge of his true fate position her as one of the few beings who understand the full tragedy of his corruption and the impossibility of the rescue that so many others continue to hope might somehow be achieved. Her grief encompasses not merely the loss of someone she loved, but the destruction of everything that made that love meaningful and worthwhile. Her willingness to trade away Artorias' soul, should circumstances require such sacrifice, reveals the complex calculations that love must sometimes make when faced with choices between preservation of memory and acknowledgement of reality. Her recognition that holding on to what he has become serves no constructive purpose demonstrates wisdom born from suffering that has moved beyond sentiment into realms of practical necessity. The weapons and techniques associated with her fighting style preserve something of the old ways, while adapting to new circumstances that require different forms of strength and different definitions of victory. Her blades serve now as instruments of mercy rather than tools of conquest, offering quick death to those whose existence has become nothing more than prolonged suffering. Her presence in the painted world, her choice to live among the rejected and forgotten, rather than continuing to serve powers that demonstrated their limitations through their failures, speaks to a form of solidarity with outcasts that transcends normal categories of political loyalty or professional obligation. These lords and fallen royalty, in their various forms of diminishment and persistence, preserve something essential about the relationship between power and responsibility, while simultaneously demonstrating the inevitable consequences that follow when such relationships are subjected to forces that operate beyond normal, political or moral frameworks. Their stories reveal both the heights that conscious beings can reach when they commit themselves to purposes larger than individual survival, and the depths to which they can fall when such commitment encounters realities that exceed their purposes' larger capacity to understand or control. Their ruins and monuments, scattered throughout the realm and serving as reminders of what was once achieved and what was ultimately lost, create an atmosphere of profound melancholy that speaks to the transitory nature of all earthly accomplishment. Yet in their persistence, their continued existence in forms that bear witness to both former glory and present diminishment, they also demonstrate something indestructible about the human capacity to find meaning even in loss and purpose, even in defeat. In the ethereal realms where divine authority meets mortal aspiration, and ancient powers offer glimpses of transcendence to those bold enough to seek such dangerous gifts, dwell the covenant leaders and primordial forces whose very existence predates the current cosmic order by spans so vast that their origins merge with the fundamental principles that shaped reality in its earliest manifestations. These beings represent not merely political or religious authority, but embodiment of concepts so basic to existence that they operate as natural laws given consciousness and will. Their covenants and pacts serve purposes that extend far beyond normal categories of alliance or mutual benefit, creating relationships that bind participants to cosmic principles rather than individual personalities, transforming those who accept such bonds into instruments of forces that may care nothing for mortal welfare or comprehension. In their various offers of power and transcendence, they reveal both the ultimate possibilities available to conscious beings and the prices that such possibilities demand from those who would claim them. Deep in the cathedral city of Anor Londo, where illusion has become more real than reality and deception serves the cause of hope more faithfully than truth ever could, rules Gwyndolin, the dark sun whose androgynous nature reflects the complex balance of opposing forces that his existence represents. His mastery of lunar sorcery and his role as the last active deity in a pantheon whose other members have either died or withdrawn from earthly affairs position him as keeper of divine authority that serves primarily to preserve the appearance of godly presence rather than to exercise genuine cosmic power. Gwyndolin's illusions that maintain the apparent vitality of Anor Londo speak to understanding that sometimes the preservation of hope requires the systematic suppression of truth, creating circumstances where deception becomes a form of mercy and lies serve more constructive purposes than honest acknowledgement of harsh realities. His elaborate charade serves the psychological needs of those who require divine guidance more than it serves any practical cosmic function. The Dark Sun's Covenant offers participants the opportunity to serve as protectors of other players, creating a form of divine mission that transforms combat into a sacramental activity rather than mere violence or competition. His chosen servants become instruments of protection and aid, their invasions serving to assist rather than to harm those they encounter, reversing the normal relationship between aggression and cooperation in ways that reflect his mastery of inversion and paradox. His knowledge of his sister Guinevere's true fate, and his complicity in maintaining the illusion of her continued presence, reveals someone whose loyalty to family has been complicated by circumstances that make honest acknowledgement of loss impossible without destroying the larger structures that depend upon the appearance of divine continuity. His preservation of her image serves both personal and political needs that have become impossible to separate. The cathedral that serves as his throne room creates an environment where worship and governance merge into activities that transcend normal categories of religious and political authority. Yet his physical weakness and his dependence upon illusion rather than direct power, reveal the limitations that constrain even divine authority when it lacks the cosmic support that once made such authority meaningful and effective. His eventual fate, should his deceptions be exposed and his physical form destroyed, speaks to the fragility of authority that depends upon appearance rather than substance. Yet his willingness to maintain his charade until the very end demonstrates commitment to purposes that transcend personal survival or individual comfort. His service to dying ideals continues, even when such service no longer provides any personal benefit or satisfaction. The illusory Princess Guinevere, whose radiant presence fills the great hall with warmth and light, represents, perhaps, the most sophisticated magical construction in all of Lordran, a projection so complete and convincing that it functions as adequate replacement for the genuine article in all but the most demanding circumstances. Her apparent divinity serves psychological and spiritual needs that genuine divine presence once fulfilled. Yet her artificial nature speaks to the degree to which the current age depends upon substitutes and approximations rather than authentic connection to transcendent realities. The princess's role as dispenser of the Lord Vessel and her authority to grant access to the cosmic machinery that determines the fate of the current age reveal the way in which even elaborate deceptions can serve as conduits for genuine power when circumstances require such arrangements. Her artificial nature does not diminish her functional authority, suggesting that the relationship between authenticity and effectiveness may be more complex than conventional wisdom suggests. Her massive size and overwhelming presence create an atmosphere of awe and worship that serves the same psychological functions that genuine divine encounters once provided. Yet her exaggerated proportions also serve as subtle hints about her artificial nature for those who possess the sensitivity to recognize such clues. Her very perfection becomes a form of evidence for those who understand that genuine divinity rarely presents itself in forms so obviously designed to inspire worship. The sunlight miracles associated with her covenant and the protective functions that such miracles provide demonstrate the way in which even artificial divine authority can channel genuine cosmic forces when the need is sufficiently great and the intention sufficiently pure. Her power may be projected rather than inherent, yet its effects remain functionally identical to those produced by authentic divine intervention. Her destruction, when the illusions maintaining Anor Londo are dispelled, reveals the degree to which hope and meaning in the current age depend upon structures that may be fundamentally unstable. Yet her influence continues to shape the behavior of those who encountered her, even after they learn of her artificial nature. The memory of divine presence may serve some of the same functions as genuine divine presence, preserving something essential about the relationship between mortal aspiration and transcendent reality. The covenant of the Princess of Sunlight continues to function even after her destruction, suggesting that the spiritual and cosmic principles she represented possess reality that transcends the particular form through which they were expressed. Her legacy demonstrates the way in which even artificial divine authority can serve as catalyst for genuine spiritual development and meaningful service to causes larger than individual interest. In the ash-covered wastes beyond the normal boundaries of space and time dwells the everlasting dragon, whose very existence represents an alternative to the cycle of fire and dark that has defined cosmic history since the end of the Age of Ancients. His covenant offers participants the opportunity to transcend normal categories of life and death, mortality and divinity, through transformation into something that exists outside the temporal frameworks that constrain ordinary existence. The dragon's path requires the abandonment of humanity in its conventional sense. Yet this abandonment serves not as destruction but as transcendence, replacing limited mortal existence with something that approaches true immortality through alignment with cosmic principles that operated before the current age began, and will continue to operate after it ends. His covenant represents perhaps the only genuine escape from the cycle of linking and fading that has trapped the current age in patterns of endless repetition. The meditation required to walk the dragon's path speaks to understanding that true transformation cannot be achieved through action or effort, but only through the kind of patient surrender that allows fundamental change to occur, according to its own internal logic. His teachings emphasize being rather than doing, suggesting that the most profound achievements come from alignment with reality, rather than attempts to impose individual will upon cosmic forces. The stone scales that mark progress along his path serve both as protection from normal forms of harm and as symbols of the gradual transformation that converts mortal flesh into something more durable and less dependent upon the biological processes that define ordinary existence. His followers literally become different kinds of beings, rather than simply acquiring new abilities or knowledge. The timeless nature of his existence and his apparent immunity to the forces that have shaped the rise and fall of ages suggests that his path leads towards something genuinely eternal rather than merely long-lasting, offering participants the possibility of surviving transitions that destroy everything else. His covenant may represent the only reliable means of achieving continuity that extends beyond individual lifespans or cosmic cycles. His location in the ash-covered wastes speaks to the kind of spiritual environment that supports genuine transcendence, places where normal concerns and distractions have been stripped away, leaving only the essential elements needed for fundamental transformation. His realm exists apart from the political and social structures that complicate life in more civilized areas. From the shadowed places where justice takes forms that conventional morality cannot recognize, comes the influence of Velka, goddess of sin, whose authority extends not merely over the punishment of wrongdoing, but over the complex relationships between action and consequence that define moral existence in a cosmos where traditional ethical frameworks have been rendered inadequate by circumstances that exceed their original parameters. Velka's understanding of sin encompasses not merely violations of established law, but the deeper forms of wrongdoing that occur when beings act in ways that violate the fundamental principles underlying reality itself, creating disruptions that propagate through dimensions of existence that normal consciousness cannot perceive or understand. Her justice operates according to logic that takes into account consequences that extend far beyond immediate effects. The ravens that serve as her messengers and agents demonstrate her ability to work through natural systems rather than requiring elaborate institutional structures, creating networks of communication and influence that function independently of political arrangements or social organizations. Her authority operates through channels that bypass normal hierarchies while remaining functionally effective for those who understand how to access them. Her pardoning services and the absolution she offers through her representatives reveal understanding that justice requires not merely punishment but genuine resolution of the conflicts and imbalances that wrongdoing creates, yet her methods for achieving such resolution often involve forms of reparation that exceed normal categories of legal or moral obligation. The Book of the Guilty that records the sins of those who transgress against other undead speaks to comprehensive awareness of moral violations that occur even in circumstances where conventional authority structures cannot monitor or respond to such violations. Her justice fills gaps that other systems leave unaddressed, ensuring that wrongdoing eventually meets appropriate consequences, even when such consequences are delayed or take unexpected forms. Her connection to the occult arts and the dark miracles associated with her worship demonstrate mastery of forces that exist outside normal religious frameworks, yet these forces serve ultimately constructive purposes, Despite their unsettling nature, her power draws upon aspects of reality that more conventional deities prefer to ignore or suppress. In the primordial depths where humanity first encountered the cosmic forces that would shape its destiny stands the memory of the furtive pygmy, the forgotten lord, whose discovery of the dark soul established the foundation for everything that would follow in human history. His legacy lives on, not through monuments or institutions, but through the essential nature of humanity itself, the darkness that exists within every human soul, as both potential for greatness and capacity for corruption. The pygmy's role as humanity's progenitor and his possession of the most powerful of the Lord Souls position him as figure whose influence exceeds that of more obviously powerful beings. Yet his furtive nature and his deliberate self-effacement speak to wisdom that recognizes the dangers inherent in cosmic authority and chooses humility over dominance as the safer path. His fragmentation of the dark soul and its distribution among his descendants created the conditions that would eventually lead to the undead curse. Yet this apparent catastrophe may actually represent long-term strategy designed to ensure humanity's survival through circumstances that would otherwise destroy it entirely. His foresight may have extended far beyond the immediate consequences of his actions. The humanity that serves as both curse and blessing for his descendants carries within it the concentrated essence of his original soul, making every human being a fragment of primordial power that possesses potential for both transcendence and corruption. His legacy makes humanity simultaneously the weakest and most dangerous of all the races that inhabit the current age. His connection to the abyss and the dark magic that emerges from human nature reveals the double-edged character of the gifts he provided to his descendants, offering power that can serve either constructive or destructive purposes depending upon the wisdom and restraint of those who wield it. His darkness contains both salvation and damnation in equal measure. The forgotten nature of his contribution to cosmic history speaks to the way in which the most fundamental influences often remain invisible to those who benefit from them, creating situations where humanity remains largely unaware of its true nature and potential. His hiddenness may serve protective functions that make discovery of his true identity dangerous for his descendants. From the tortured ruins of Ulasail emerges the nightmarish figure of Manus, Father of the Abyss, whose transformation from man into cosmic horror represents perhaps the most complete corruption of human nature ever recorded, yet whose rage and suffering retain recognizably human characteristics that make his monstrosity all the more tragic and terrible. His existence demonstrates both the ultimate potential that lies dormant within humanity and the ultimate horror that can emerge when that potential is awakened through trauma rather than wisdom. Manus's creation of the abyss and his role as progenitor of the dark magic that threatens to consume the current age reveal power that rivals or exceeds that of the original lords. Yet this power serves no constructive purpose beyond the expression of rage and the infliction of suffering upon those who remind him of his own torment. His authority creates only destruction and corruption, transforming everything it touches into reflections of his own pain. His fragmented humanity and the pieces of his broken pendant speak to identity that has been shattered by experiences so traumatic that reconstruction becomes impossible, leaving behind only the raw emotional essence of someone whose capacity for love and connection has been perverted into hunger for revenge and domination. His corruption represents the dark mirror of human potential. The abyssal magic that flows from his presence and the creatures that emerge from his influence demonstrate creativity that has been divorced from all positive purpose, generating new forms of existence that serve only to spread the same corruption and suffering that created them. His fatherhood produces only monsters that inherit his pain without inheriting any of his original humanity. His connection to the primordial human nature, and his role as inadvertent revealer of humanity's true potential position, him as figure whose existence forces recognition of truths that most would prefer to ignore about the relationship between consciousness and cosmic power. His monstrosity serves as warning about the dangers inherent in human nature when it is developed without adequate wisdom or restraint. The catalyst required to reach him and the temporal displacement necessary to encounter him speak to the way in which some forms of knowledge can only be accessed by those willing to accept the risks inherent in traveling to places and times where normal protective structures do not operate effectively. In the painted world where beauty and terror dance together in forms that exceed normal aesthetic categories dwells Priscilla the crossbreed, whose gentle nature and terrible power create a combination that embodies the paradoxes inherent in existence at the boundaries between different orders of reality. Her exile to the painted world speaks not to any wrongdoing on her part, but to the fear that her very existence inspires in those who cannot accept the possibility that different natures can be successfully combined. Priscilla's mastery of life hunt magic and her ability to drain the very essence of existence from those who threaten her demonstrate power that operates according to principles fundamentally different from those that govern normal combat or conflict. Yet she employs these abilities only in self-defense and shows genuine reluctance to harm those who approach her peacefully. Her role as ruler of the painted world and protector of its various outcast inhabitants reveals leadership that operates through compassion and understanding rather than force or intimidation, creating an environment where beings who cannot exist safely in the normal world can find acceptance and community. Her governance serves the needs of the governed rather than the ambitions of the governor. The painted world itself, with its unique properties and its function as refuge for the rejected and exiled, demonstrates the possibility of creating alternative realities that operate according to different principles than those that govern the mainstream cosmic order. Yet these alternatives remain fragile and dependent upon the continued existence of those who maintain them. Her crossbreed nature and the combination of dragon and deity characteristics that define her essential being speak to the possibility of transcending the categories and limitations that normally constrain existence. Yet her exile also demonstrates the social and political costs that such transcendence often involves. Her achievement comes with isolation that may be too great a price for most beings to accept. Her invisibility and the difficulty involved in detecting her presence when she chooses concealment reveal mastery of techniques that exist at the intersection of different forms of reality, allowing her to move between visible and invisible states according to need. Her power operates through subtlety and indirection rather than obvious displays of force. These covenant leaders and ancient powers, in their various forms of authority and transcendence, preserve something essential about the relationship between individual consciousness and cosmic principle, while simultaneously demonstrating the profound transformations that such relationships require from those who choose to pursue them. Their covenants offer possibilities that extend far beyond normal categories of achievement or advancement, yet these possibilities come with obligations and changes that may fundamentally alter the nature of those who accept them. Their realms and domains, scattered throughout the cosmic order and serving as focal points for forces that operate according to logic different from normal political or social arrangements. create opportunities for forms of existence that transcend the limitations of ordinary life, while simultaneously revealing the costs and complications that such transcendence involves. Their gifts transform recipients in ways that may be irreversible and not always entirely welcome. In their various forms of wisdom and limitation, these ancient beings serve as bridges between mortal aspiration and cosmic reality, offering paths toward transcendence while simultaneously warning about the prices that such transcendence demands and the changes it produces in those who successfully navigate its requirements. Their covenants represent both the ultimate possibilities available to conscious beings and the ultimate challenges that such possibilities present to those who would claim them. In the liminal spaces where service transcends self and devotion becomes a form of prayer made manifest through action, dwell those final witnesses whose lives have been shaped not by personal ambition or individual desire, but by complete surrender to purposes larger than any single existence can contain. These are the followers and keepers of memory, beings whose stories interweave with the grand narratives of heroes and villains, yet whose significance lies not in their own achievements but in their capacity to preserve, protect, and bear witness to truths that might otherwise be lost when the more prominent figures pass into legend or oblivion. Their presence throughout the realm serves as reminder that even the greatest deeds depend upon networks of support and understanding that extend far beyond the individual actors who receive credit for cosmic achievements. Yet their own contributions often remain invisible to all but the most careful observers of the complex relationships that bind fate and choice into patterns too intricate for casual comprehension to unravel completely. In the mist-shrouded reaches of the painted world where outcasts find their only refuge from a reality too harsh for their gentle natures to endure, move the forgotten inhabitants whose crimes were not evil but difference, whose punishment was not imprisonment but exile to a realm that exists parallel to normal existence yet forever separated from its warmth and community. These painted souls embody the tragedy of those who are rejected, not for what they have done, but for what they represent, fears, and possibilities that more conventional minds cannot accept or integrate. The phalanx soldiers who guard the world's inner reaches demonstrate loyalty that persists even in exile, their coordinated movements and protective formations speaking to discipline and purpose that have survived intact despite their banishment from the realms they were trained to serve. Their shields lock together in patterns that create barriers almost impossible to penetrate, yet their defensive posture suggests protection of something precious rather than mere territorial aggression. These warriors serve not conquest but preservation, their every action designed to maintain the integrity of the sanctuary they have been given while simultaneously protecting those who dwell within it from threats that might emerge from the outside world. Their loyalty has been transferred from earthly masters who rejected them to cosmic principles that accept their service without question or judgment. The undead dragons that soar through the painted skies reveal corruption that has taken a different form than the malice-driven transformations seen elsewhere, their undeath representing not active evil but passive persistence, the refusal of once noble creatures to accept the finality of endings that were imposed upon them without their consent. Their flight patterns suggest not predatory hunting but melancholy patrol of territories that exist now only in memory. These draconic spirits serve as guardians of the painted realm, while simultaneously representing the fate that awaits all who are caught between different states of existence, neither fully alive nor completely dead, their liminal condition, making them perfect inhabitants of a world that itself exists in the spaces between reality and representation. The various other inhabitants scattered throughout the painted landscape tell stories of exile and adaptation, each having found their own way to survive in circumstances that were never meant to sustain life. but have become home through necessity and gradual acceptance. Their presence creates a community of outcasts that functions according to rules different from those that govern normal society. King Jeremiah's subjects, those who followed their mad monarch into exile, rather than abandoning him to face his fate alone, demonstrate loyalty that transcends rational calculation and enters realms where devotion becomes a form of shared madness. Their willingness to accept exile, alongside their ruler, speaks to bonds that operate according to logic deeper than political obligation or personal advantage. From the elite ranks of Astora's knightly orders comes the figure of Oscar, the knight whose parallel journey to the chosen undead's quest reveals the thin lines that separate heroism from tragedy, success from failure, hope from despair. His presence at the undead asylum speaks to dedication that led him to venture into places where heroes are made or broken, carrying with him the Estus flask that would become instrumental in another's salvation, even as his own fate remained shrouded in uncertainty and potential doom. Oscar's mission to the asylum and his role in providing the tools necessary for the chosen undead's escape represent the kind of selfless service that enables greater achievements while remaining largely invisible to those who benefit from such assistance. His gift of the Estus flask serves purposes that extend far beyond his own understanding or intention, becoming catalyst for events that would reshape the cosmic order itself. The knight's origins among Astora's elite forces position him as representative of the old traditions of knightly service and noble obligation. Yet his willingness to venture into the asylum alone speaks to understanding that true heroism often requires abandoning the support systems that make conventional glory possible. His journey into isolation mirrors that of many who would follow similar paths. His knowledge of the bells and their significance in the larger cosmic scheme reveals someone who possessed information crucial to the success of missions he would never live to complete, making him keeper of knowledge whose value would only become apparent through the achievements of others. His wisdom serves purposes that transcend his individual survival or recognition. The prophecy that guided his actions and the faith that sustained his commitment to seemingly impossible tasks demonstrate the kind of belief that operates independently of evidence or rational justification, finding its validation through outcomes that exceed the believer's capacity to predict or control. His trust in cosmic purpose enabled him to fulfill functions he never fully understood. His potential fate, whether it involves hollow transformation or heroic sacrifice, speaks to the precarious nature of all heroic endeavors and the thin margins that separate success from failure when dealing with forces that operate according to their own mysterious logic rather than human intention or desire. In the mechanical depths of Sen's fortress, among the grinding gears and swinging blades that have claimed countless lives, echoes the legend of Black Iron Tarkus, the warrior whose conquest of the Iron Golem stands as one of the most impressive individual achievements in recorded combat history, yet whose ultimate fate demonstrates the way in which even the most spectacular victories can lead to circumstances that make survival impossible or meaningless. Tarkus's distinctive armor and massive weapons speak to physical strength that bordered on the superhuman, yet his approach to combat appears to have been based more on tactical intelligence and technical proficiency than mere brute force, suggesting someone who understood that victory in the most challenging encounters requires comprehensive preparation rather than simple courage or determination. His navigation of Sen's fortress and his successful assault on the Iron Golem reveal mastery of both individual combat techniques and environmental awareness that enabled him to succeed where countless other warriors had failed, turning the fortress's own mechanical systems into allies rather than obstacles through superior understanding of their functions and limitations. The warrior's presence in Anor Londo following his victory over the golem suggests that his achievements earned him access to the city of the gods themselves. Yet his fate in that luminous realm speaks to the way in which even the most impressive martial accomplishments may prove insufficient when facing challenges that operate according to different principles than those that govern normal combat. His equipment, scattered throughout Anor Londo and available for others to claim, tells a story of someone who ventured beyond the limits of his expertise into territories where physical prowess alone could not ensure survival. Yet his legacy continues to serve others who face similar challenges through the practical benefits his gear provides. The mystery surrounding his exact fate and the absence of clear evidence about what ultimately claimed his life create an atmosphere of uncertainty that speaks to the way in which even legendary figures can disappear without explanation when they encounter forces that exceed their capacity to understand or resist. His example serves both as inspiration for those who would follow similar paths and as warning about the limitations that constrain even the most exceptional individuals when they venture beyond the boundaries of their proven competence into realms where different forms of strength become necessary for survival. From the distant future of Ulasail's timeline comes the enigmatic Chester, whose knowledge of events that have not yet occurred positions him as witness to the ultimate consequences of choices being made in the present, yet whose cynical detachment from the suffering around him suggests that such knowledge has come at the cost of emotional connection to the people whose fates he observes with such casual interest. Chester's anachronistic equipment and mannerisms mark him as visitor from an era that represents either humanity's technological advancement or its moral decline, depending upon how one interprets the relationship between progress and wisdom in the development of civilizations that must constantly choose between power and restraint. His understanding of the abyss and its effects reveals someone who has witnessed firsthand the long-term consequences of humanity's encounter with primordial darkness. Yet his apparent comfort with such forces suggests that future generations may find ways to coexist with corruption that present understanding considers impossible to survive or integrate. The gunpowder weapons that Chester carries represent technological developments that exceed the current age's capacity to produce or comprehend. Yet their presence suggests that human ingenuity will continue to find new forms of expression, even in circumstances that appear to offer only options between stagnation and corruption. His displacement in time and his presence in Ulasail during its moment of greatest crisis position him as observer whose perspective encompasses both the immediate causes and ultimate effects of the events that transformed the kingdom. From center of learning into realm of monsters, yet his refusal to intervene speaks to understanding that such knowledge comes with obligations to preserve historical outcomes rather than prevent them. His interactions with those he encounters reveal someone who has learned to find entertainment in the struggles of beings whose perspective remains limited to their immediate circumstances. Yet his assistance, when offered, suggests that his detachment may be more protective mechanism than genuine indifference to suffering. The marvelous nature of his abilities and equipment speaks to possibilities that lie dormant within human potential. Yet his corruption, by exposure to the abyss, demonstrates the prices that such advancement may require from those who would claim powers that exceed normal limitations. Moving through the deepest places where ancient wisdom still whispers to those who possess the sensitivity to hear it, the primordial serpents weave their influence through channels that bypass normal political and social structures while shaping outcomes that determine the fate of ages and cosmic cycles. These entities represent intelligence so old and perspective so vast that their true purposes may be incomprehensible to minds that operate according to more limited temporal frameworks. The serpent's manipulation of events and their ability to present themselves as advisors while serving their own mysterious agenda reveals sophistication that makes them perhaps the most dangerous figures in all the realm's complex political landscape. Yet their influence appears to serve cosmic balance rather than mere personal advancement, suggesting that their deceptions may ultimately serve constructive purposes despite their immediate costs. Their knowledge of the cosmic machinery that governs transitions between ages and their understanding of the relationship between divine authority and natural law position them as keepers of information that could reshape understanding of fundamental reality. Yet they share this knowledge only in fragments, and only when such sharing serves their larger purposes. The serpent's ability to appear in different locations and their apparent immortality speak to nature that transcends normal categories of life and death, individual and collective, temporal and eternal, making them representatives of forces that operate according to principles older than the current cosmic order and likely to survive its eventual transformation. Their rival interpretations of history and prophecy create situations where following either serpent's guidance leads to outcomes that serve the larger cosmic balance, while simultaneously advancing their apparently competing agendas, suggesting that their opposition may be more theatrical than substantive and designed to ensure that all possibilities remain available rather than foreclosed by premature commitment to single approaches. Their presence in the depths and their connection to the fundamental structures that support reality itself mark them as beings whose influence extends far beyond their apparent physical limitations, creating networks of causation that shape events through indirect means rather than obvious intervention. At the center of all these intersecting narratives and parallel journeys stands the figure of the chosen undead, the player character whose unique position as protagonist makes them simultaneously the most important and most mysterious figure in the entire cosmic drama. Their role transcends normal categories of heroism or villainy, individual achievement or cosmic function, making them representatives of possibilities that exist within every consciousness, yet are actualized only under the most extreme circumstances. The chosen undead's journey through the realm and their encounters with all the various figures who populate its spaces create a web of relationships and influences that demonstrate the way in which individual choice and cosmic destiny intersect in patterns too complex for easy analysis or prediction, yet their unique status as bearer of agency in a world largely populated by beings whose options have been constrained by circumstance or nature makes them catalyst for changes that exceed their personal intentions or understanding. Their collection of souls and their gradual accumulation of power speak to the way in which heroic achievement depends upon the absorption and integration of qualities and abilities that others have developed through their own struggles and sacrifices, making the hero's success dependent upon a vast network of prior accomplishments that are honored through continuation rather than mere commemoration. The chosen undead's choices regarding the various covenants and their decisions about which NPCs to help or harm create ripple effects that reshape the moral and spiritual landscape of the entire realm, demonstrating the way in which individual actions can serve cosmic functions that exceed their immediate apparent significance. Their potential linking of the fire or embrace of the Dark Age represents decision-making that affects not merely their own fate but the fundamental nature of reality for all conscious beings, making them bearer of responsibility so vast that it approaches the cosmic authority once wielded by the original lords whose positions they may ultimately claim or reject. The weapons they wield and the techniques they master tell stories of everyone whose equipment they claim and whose knowledge they absorb, making them living repository of the realm's accumulated wisdom and power, while simultaneously serving as instrument through which that accumulation finds its ultimate expression and purpose. Their various possible endings and the multiple paths available for completing their journey reflect the way in which heroic achievement must always remain contingent upon choice rather than predestination, preserving agency even in circumstances where cosmic forces seem to determine outcomes through means that exceed individual understanding or control. In the shadows and margins of these grand narratives, countless other figures move through their own smaller stories of love and loss, hope and despair, service and abandonment, each contributing threads to a tapestry so complex that no single perspective can encompass its full design or meaning. These minor characters and forgotten souls preserve something essential about the human experience that might otherwise be lost in the focus on cosmic forces and divine authority. Their various forms of persistence and adaptation demonstrate the way in which life continues to find meaning and purpose, even in circumstances that appear to offer only options between different forms of defeat or compromise, showing that significance may be found in the smallest gestures and most limited spheres of influence, when such gestures serve purposes larger than individual survival or advancement. The followers and witnesses, in their various forms of service and memory, preserve something essential about the relationships that bind individual consciousness to cosmic purpose, while simultaneously demonstrating the prices and rewards that such relationships offer to those who choose to embrace them. Their stories reveal both the necessity of community and support in achieving anything significant, and the inevitable loneliness that accompanies roles that require complete dedication to purposes that may never be fully understood or adequately rewarded. Their presence throughout the realm creates networks of meaning and connection that ensure the survival of knowledge, technique, and wisdom through transitions that might otherwise result in complete cultural amnesia, making them guardians of continuity in a world where change often takes forms so dramatic that they threaten to sever all connections between past achievement and future possibility. And so we reach the end of our journey through these tales of loss and longing, though in truth there is no true ending in the lands of Lordran. Each soul we have met continues their eternal dance between hope and despair, purpose and purposelessness, humanity and hollowing. The fire may fade and be rekindled. The dark may rise and be pushed back, but the stories endure whispered by the wind through ruined halls, carved in the very stones of ancient castles. These NPCs, these fragments of broken dreams and shattered ambitions, remind us that even in the darkest of worlds, connection persists. The merchant who shares his bitter wisdom, the knight who offers jolly cooperation, the keeper who tends an eternal flame, all reach across the void of their cursed existence to touch another soul, however briefly. Yet in their reaching, in their desperate attempts to maintain meaning in a world that has seemingly abandoned such concepts, they reveal something profound about the nature of existence itself. Perhaps meaning was never something that the world provided freely to those who sought it, but rather something that conscious beings must create through their choices, their relationships, and their refusal to surrender to the darkness that constantly threatens to overwhelm everything they hold dear. The crestfallen warrior's eventual hollow fate speaks not merely to individual failure, but to the danger that awaits all who lose sight of purposes larger than their own survival. Yet even in his warnings and his pessimistic observations, he served others, providing information and perspective that helped prepare countless undead for the trials they would face. His service continued even as his hope died, demonstrating that duty can transcend the emotions that originally inspired it. Soler's quest for his own sun, whether it ends in the false illumination of the sunlight maggot or the genuine partnership of standing beside the chosen undead in the final battle, represents the human capacity to find transcendence through dedication to ideals that may exist more powerfully in aspiration than in achievement. His jolly cooperation creates moments of warmth and fellowship that justify themselves regardless of their ultimate outcomes. The merchants and traders who maintain commerce in impossible circumstances preserve something essential about civilization itself. The understanding that individual survival depends upon networks of exchange and mutual support that must be maintained even when the larger structures that once gave such networks meaning have collapsed entirely. Their continued willingness to trade with strangers speaks to faith in human nature that persists despite overwhelming evidence of humanity's capacity for betrayal and cruelty. The scholars and seekers whose pursuit of knowledge led them into madness demonstrate both the nobility of intellectual curiosity and its potential dangers. Yet their research and their discoveries continue to benefit others long after the original investigators have paid the ultimate price for their dedication. Logan's crystalline sorceries may have cost him his sanity, but they provide power that can serve constructive purposes in more careful hands. The servants of faith whose gods have fallen silent continue their devotions not because they expect divine reward, but because the act of service itself has become their form of prayer, their way of maintaining connection to principles that transcend the immediate circumstances of their cursed existence. Anastasia's silent tending of the flame speaks louder than any sermon about the nature of true devotion. Even the broken and the mad preserve something essential through their various forms of adaptation and persistence. The fair lady's gentle acceptance of her corruption transforms suffering into a form of grace that inspires protective devotion in others, while Quilana's guilt-driven teaching ensures that the knowledge of pyromancy survives despite the disasters that its misuse has created. The guardians and protectors who maintain their posts long after their original purposes have been forgotten or rendered obsolete demonstrate the way in which true mastery transcends immediate utility to become a form of communion with the fundamental principles that shape reality. Andre's hammer continues to ring against his anvil, not because the weapons he creates serve any grand cosmic purpose, but because the act of creation itself serves purposes deeper than individual intention or understanding. The lords and fallen royalty, whose sacrifices shaped the current age, reveal both the heights that power can reach when dedicated to purposes larger than personal ambition, and the inevitable decay that claims even the most noble achievements when they encounter forces that operate according to logic, beyond political or individual control. Yet their ruins and their remnants continue to serve as foundations for whatever comes next. The Covenant leaders and ancient powers whose offers of transcendence come with prices that may exceed mortal capacity to pay demonstrate the complex relationships between individual aspiration and cosmic principle, yet they also preserve possibilities that might otherwise be foreclosed by premature resignation to apparent limitations. Their paths remain available for those who possess the courage and wisdom to walk them. In the painted world where outcasts find refuge from realities too harsh for their gentle natures to endure, we see the possibility of alternative forms of existence that operate according to different principles than those that govern mainstream reality. These painted souls remind us that rejection by one form of society does not necessarily indicate fundamental unfitness for all possible forms of community. The followers and witnesses whose stories interweave with the grand narratives of heroes and villains preserve something essential about the networks of support and understanding that make individual achievement possible, while simultaneously revealing the often invisible contributions that enable the most visible accomplishments. And through all these intersecting tales runs the thread of the chosen undead's journey, the player character whose unique position as bearer of agency in a world of constrained choices makes them catalyst for possibilities that exceed their personal understanding or intention. Their story encompasses all the others, while simultaneously depending upon them for meaning and context. What emerges from this vast tapestry of interconnected narratives is not a single message or moral, but rather a complex meditation on the nature of existence itself, in circumstances where traditional sources of meaning have been challenged or destroyed. These souls demonstrate that meaning is not something that the world provides to consciousness, but something that consciousness creates through its responses to whatever circumstances it encounters. Their various forms of persistence, the merchant who continues to trade despite having no real hope of profit, the knight who offers cooperation despite having no reason to expect reciprocation, the scholar who continues to teach despite knowing that knowledge can become curse, reveal something indestructible about the human spirit that refuses to be completely extinguished, even when transformed beyond all recognition. In choosing to continue to help others, to seek purpose even in a purposeless world, they become more than the sum of their individual sorrows and struggles. They become legends, and legends possess a form of immortality that transcends the biological persistence that they originally sought to preserve through their various quests and covenants. Their weapons and armor, scattered throughout the realm and available for others to claim, serve as material reminders of the way in which achievement builds upon achievement across generations and ages, creating continuities that persist even when individual memory fails. The sword that once served a hollow knight can serve a living hero, carrying forward not merely its practical utility, but something of the spirit that originally wielded it with purpose and skill. Their stories, preserved in item descriptions and environmental details, in the reactions of other characters and the echoes of their influence throughout the world, create a form of collective memory that ensures their significance will not be entirely lost, even if their individual identities fade from active recollection. They become part of the world's history in ways that transcend personal fame or recognition. The bonfires they tended and the flames they preserved continue to provide warmth and comfort to travelers long after the original keepers have moved on to other duties or other forms of existence. Their service creates benefits that outlast their capacity to witness or appreciate those benefits, making their sacrifice a gift to strangers whose gratitude they will never receive. The knowledge they preserved and the techniques they developed continue to serve purposes that they could never have anticipated, demonstrating the way in which genuine achievement creates resources that find applications beyond the original creator's intentions or understanding. Their contributions to the sum total of wisdom available in the world exceed their conscious goals. Perhaps most importantly, their example demonstrates that heroism need not take the form of grand gestures or cosmic significance to possess genuine meaning and value. The simple choice to help rather than harm, to preserve rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, creates ripple effects that may ultimately prove more significant than actions that appear more obviously important. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you not the darkness of their world, but the light of their endurance. In choosing to continue, to help others, to seek purpose even in a purposeless world, they become more than the sum of their sorrows. They become legends, and legends never truly die. The merchant's bitter laughter echoing through empty corridors, the knight's cheerful greeting offered to strangers in hostile territory, the scholar's patient explanation of dangerous knowledge to students who may not survive its application. All these moments of human connection create temporary victories against the forces of isolation and meaninglessness that constantly threaten to reduce existence to mere survival. Their love transcends the boundaries between life and death, sanity and madness, hope and despair, creating bonds that persist even when their original objects have been transformed beyond recognition. The devotion that Kirk shows to the fair lady, the loyalty that Sif demonstrates toward Artorias' memory, the friendship that endures between characters who have every reason to abandon such connections, all serve as evidence that some forms of meaning prove stronger than the forces that would destroy them. In the end, what makes their stories worth telling is not their endings but their persistence, not their achievements but their refusal to surrender, not their victories but their continued capacity to care about something beyond their own immediate circumstances. They remind us that the choice to remain human in inhuman circumstances is perhaps the most heroic act of all. Rest now, chosen one. Let their stories guide your dreams toward peaceful shores, where the bells ring not in summons to impossible quests, but in celebration of connections that persist beyond death, beyond madness, beyond the fading of all the fires that once lit the world. In their persistence, in their stubborn refusal to accept that meaning is impossible, they prove that consciousness itself is rebellion against a universe that would prefer the silence of empty space to the complicated music of souls reaching toward each other across the darkness. Their tales end, but their influence continues, woven into the very fabric of the world they tried so hard to preserve or transform. And in that continuation, in that persistence of purpose beyond individual existence, they achieve the only form of immortality that any conscious being can truly claim: the knowledge that their choices mattered, that their struggles had meaning, that their love changed something in the world that will outlast their mortal forms and endure as long as there are souls who remember what it means to refuse surrender to the darkness. Sleep well and dream of their courage,